Chapter 891. The front yard of Peach Mountain shook violently. Lebu, the most powerful martial artist of the Golden Tribe royal court, had finally made his move. His reaction was no slower than that of the national master and Qin Yan. But because he was a martial artist, it took him some time to reach Ning Ke like a tiger. It did not matter how early he came because he would have to retreat eventually. Ning Ke heard the whistling sound behind him. He turned his wrist and the black cutlass came back from his shoulder, hitting Lebu's fist. Previously, Lebu's fist had collided with Tang Xiaodong's iron cudgel countless times. It should be known that the seemingly crude iron cudgel was the sacred object of the devil's doctrine. But when he met it with his bare hands, there was not even a scratch on his fist. It could be imagined how terrifying his martial arts cultivation was. However, when his fist met with the iron cudgel, there was only a cracking sound. Like a wounded tiger, Lebu howled in pain. His wrist bones were all broken, and his body, which was as strong as a mountain, shook miserably and then fell heavily on the ground. At the same time, the attacks from the South Sea and the divine priests of the West Hill Divine Palace had finally arrived. Hundreds of beams of sword radiance flew at high speed toward Ning Ke's body like a storm. Everyone knew that they had to kill Ning Ke in the shortest time possible so that he would not be able to shoot a second arrow. That was why they risked their lives and attacked one after another. However, due to the difference in their cultivation states, the order of their attacks was different. Thus, the national master of the Golden Tribe, Qin Yan, and Zhao Nanhai were the ones with the highest cultivation states. Lebu was slightly inferior and the rest were even lower. But this did not mean that the last round of attack was weaker than the first. There were too many people involved. Except for Lu Yiqing and Monk Guanhai of the Lank Temple, everyone else had combined their strength. If it was a dense rain of swords, no matter how good one's movements were, he would not be able to avoid it. But Ning Ke's bladesmanship had been trained in the Min Mountain wasteland. He was very familiar with it. Moreover, he had learned from Yi Hongyu that the sword garret of South Jin Kingdom should be at least 1 foot in front of you. Once he used it, even rain could not wet his clothes, not to mention the rain-like flying swords. What was shocking was that Ning Ke did not choose to dodge, nor did he brandish his blade to protect himself. Except for the Taoist sword that cut down an old divine priest from the South Sea, he did not even look at the other flying swords that attacked him. Hundreds of flying swords pierced Ning Ke's body. From the outside he seemed to have become a hedgehog. However, in an instant, the hundreds of flying swords broke into pieces and fell at Ning Ke's feet like rotten straws. Most of the attacking Taoist swords could not even pierce through the divine light surrounding him. Even the Taoist swords from the West Hill Divine Palace and the South Sea who were in the knowing destiny state could only pierce through his clothes and touch his skin. They lost all their power and were instantly shattered. After cultivating the Great Spirit, Ning Ke's body was already as hard as iron. At this moment, his body was filled with the majestic Hao Yan's divine power. Using the Great Spirit, he filled his body with the divine power, making him even more golden and jade-like. He was even close to the immortal state of the devil's doctrine. How could ordinary flying swords hurt him? The broken swords fell to the ground and piled up to a height of half a foot. It looked like the red and yellow leaves in the front yard of Peach Mountain, piling up into a small hill on the slightly cold ground. Ning Ke was standing in the middle. Looking at the scene in front of the altar, everyone felt a chill in their hearts, especially those powerhouses whose natal swords were shattered by him. They were desperate to the extreme. Today the West Hill Divine Palace held the right to light. There were at least 20 cultivators in the knowing destiny state in the front yard of Peach Mountain, including the hierarch of West Hill, Qin Yan of the Buddhism sect, and the national master of the Golden Tribe. It could be said that more than half of the top fighting forces in the world were present. However, such a formation was broken by Ning Ke with a single blade. Under the siege of so many powerhouses, he did not have the time to use the primordial 13 arrows again. He did not even have the rumored terrifying divine talisman. He only used the iron cutlass to defeat all the powerhouses in the world. Ning Ke was once considered the weakest world wayfarer in the history of cultivation. But today who dared to say that he was weak? Who dared to say that he was weak? Who could be stronger than him? What? Because he had accepted the Tianqi? Why could he accept Hao Yan's divine power? Even if he had cultivated beyond the 5 states, he was not a follower of Hao Yan. Why was he not overwhelmed by the Hao Yan's divine power? Everyone was shocked speechless. Countless question marks kept echoing in their hearts. At this moment, Ning Ke stabbed the iron cutlass deep into the ground and held the iron bow. Several shouts and exclamations were heard in the front yard of Peach Mountain. Ning Ke's iron cutlass was already so powerful. How terrifying would it be if he used the primordial 13 arrows? They could not allow such a scene to happen. Whether they were injured or not, everyone once again launched a fearless attack on Ning Quebec. The chi of heaven and earth in the front yard of Peach Mountain was in chaos. Just like before, the powerhouses with the highest states were the first to react. The great divine priest of Tripod, the national master of the Golden Tribe, looked solemn. The color of the wooden tripod in his hand suddenly darkened and was covered with a thin layer of frost. The national master's powerful psyche power was amplified by the wooden tripod and turned into an extremely cold psyche power mixed with the resentment of countless sacrifices from the grassland. It was aimed at Ning Ke through the air. He firmly believed that even if Ning Ke had the support of Hao Yin's divine power, he would still be in trouble before his bitter cold attack. However, he did not expect that the psyche power would disappear as soon as it was released. It was like a clay ox disappearing into the sea, and he could no longer find where it went. The psyche power attack was cut off by an invisible force. What kind of force could cut off the psyche power? Almost at the same time, Qin Yin also used his most powerful Buddhism sect method. Qin Yin was an eminent monk of the Shenkong Temple. He was a world wayfarer of the Buddhism sect who was as famous as Yi Su and Tang. Ever since the omen appeared in the wilderness 20 years ago, he had been practicing silent meditation with compassion and perseverance. He had been practicing for more than 10 years and no one had heard him speak again. He did not speak even when he was facing the Devil's Doctrine Grandmaster, 23-year cicada cultivation, who was hiding in the forest by the snow lake in Chang'an. Until the autumn rain in the Lank Temple a few years ago, when Ning Ke and Sang Sang were about to enter the Buddhist chessboard and Mr. Second of the Academy, Jun Imo, broke the silent meditation and said a word. It was this word that broke the ancient bell of the Lank Temple, and Jun Imo was forced to leave his back to Yi Su and throw his iron sword away. It was not hard to imagine how powerful this eminent monk's silent meditation was. Now several years had passed and Qin Yin's silent meditation was getting stronger and stronger. When he opened his lips slightly, a white lotus flower appeared between his lips and teeth in the autumn wind. This man had cultivated the Buddhist psyche into an entity. This was even more incredible than his Akalanatha Dharma idol. The white lotus flower floated away from his lips and flew toward Ning Quebec. No one knew what kind of power this white lotus would cause when it flew toward Ning Quebec. Ning Ke did not know, and he did not want to know. People on the front yard of Peach Mountain wanted to know but they could not. Because this white lotus that contained endless Buddhist psyche did not float to Ning Quebec. Instead, it split into countless petals in front of Qin Yin's face not far away from his lips and teeth. What kind of power could cut the Buddhist psyche into pieces so quietly? Zhao Nanhai's Hao Yin divine light attacked Ning Quebec. The holy light beam condensed by the divine light was cut off less than 3 feet away from his index finger. Lebu shouted and pounced on Ning Ke again like a wounded tiger. He only took 3 steps forward and a dozen deep wounds appeared on his body. Psyche was cut. White Lotus was cut. Hao Yin divine light was cut. Even the toughest body could be easily cut down. There seemed to be countless hidden forces in the air around the altar. Those forces were so sharp that they could cut everything in the world. What kind of power could be so terrifying? The broken divine light splashed around miserably. The Buddhist psyche released by the broken white lotus twisted the light. Lebu's blood sprayed like a waterfall. Among the divine light and the blood there were some looming lines. Those lines were the source of the power. Those lines looked messy but they were actually in groups of 2. They were the talismans. Dozens of talismans appeared in the air in front of the altar. Those were Ning Ke's most powerful divine talismans. Those were the divine talismans that had cut the Abbey Dean into pieces in Chang'an. No one saw how he made the talismans because no one knew that he was not only making the enemies retreat, but also writing talismans. Every cut was a line and 2 cuts were a talisman. E-talisman. The E-talismans were floating in front of the altar. No one dared to attack Ning Ke anymore. Even the most arrogant and powerful cultivators dared not to be presumptuous in front of these simple characters. The Abbey Dean was a good example. People were shocked speechless, not only because of Ning Ke's miraculous way of writing talismans, but also because he had written so many divine talismans in such a short time. A talisman master needed talent. Not everyone could be a talisman master. But someone like Qin Yin certainly knew some basic principles of talisman Taoism. If writing talismans could be described as writing, then the psyche power of a talisman master would be the ink used to write talismans. And writing a divine talisman required an unimaginable amount of psyche power. No matter how powerful a divine talisman master was in the cultivation world, even a divine talisman master like Master Yensei could not write so many divine talismans in such a short time. But Ning Ke did it. He did not even need to meditate to recover his psyche power. How did he do it? The talismans floated in front of the Peach Mountain. Countless leaves fell and then broke. Countless screams were heard and many people lost their heads and legs. Qin Yan and the others looked solemn and dared not to move forward. The iron arrow was on the string and the iron bow was bent. Looking at the scene in front of him, Ning Ke felt that he had returned to the snowstorm in Chang'an last winter. The Haotian's divine power that Tianqi received was like the infinite power given to him by Chang'an. With this power he could do many things that others could not think of. He could write many divine talismans. He was full of confidence even when facing the Abbey Dean. It was a very good feeling. This feeling was called invincibility. Only 1 chapter today. I'm not in a good state and can't understand it. 3 chapters tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 892. The autumn leaves fell from the mountain, and the whole plain was horrifying. Broken arms and blood were flying everywhere in front of Peach Mountain. Dozens of divine talismans were looming around the altar. The powerhouses were pale and coughing up blood. They all ran away. The confinement of Taoist swords in front of Tang Xiaotang was also cut into finer pieces by the cutting talisman in the air. It was a horrible scene. The hierarch lord, who was covered in blood, stood up from the broken chariot. He did not care about his injuries at all. He yelled and struck out with his left palm. Then, several streams of solemn aura attacked Ning Ke's body from afar. The academy believed in taking things for granted. As long as one had reason, one's state of mind would be strong enough. The hierarch used the law of heaven. The human world was still the world of Haotian. His law of heaven was the truth of Haotian. Naturally it was powerful. Under the solemn aura, Ning Ke suddenly felt the momentum of waving his knife stagnate. The hierarch was seriously injured, but he could still use such a method. He was indeed the master of the divine halls of West Hill. Ning Ke was invincible in the human world. He could not be trapped by the hierarch's law of heaven. He tried to break it with his mind, but it still took him some time. The hierarch shouted, "Set up the array." In this extremely short period of time, over 1,000 divine priests on the front yard of Peach Mountain, no matter how badly injured they were, sat cross-legged on the ground and began to pray to Haotian. As the hierarch shouted, a beam of clear light rose from the front yard of Peach Mountain and touched the sky. The array of the divine hall was suddenly activated and shrank into a circle of light dozens of feet wide. The white stone altar and Ning Ke were covered in this circle of clear light. Under the guidance and direction of the priests, the tens of thousands of believers on the front lawn also began to pray. Many of the believers were injured, and their prayers sounded more like mournful cries. The prayers of tens of thousands of believers reverberated in Peach Mountain and shot up to the sky. The clear light array shrunk by hundreds of times and its power increased by hundreds of times. It pressed down on Ning Ke on the ground. Facing the array of tens of thousands of people, Ning Ke was under great pressure. He even felt like he was fighting against the whole world. If it were other cultivators, even if they were strong enough to resist the array, they would soon collapse under such mental pressure. But Ning Ke was different. He had fought against the whole world when he was fleeing for thousands of miles with Sang Sang on his back. He had experience in this aspect. He was cold enough and confident enough. With a slight change of his psyche, he used the Great Spirit to convert all the Haotian's divine power in his body into psyche power. He controlled dozens of divine talismans and fiercely rushed toward the clear light array. The clear light array and the divine talismans finally met. Dozens of white marks appeared in the air in the front yard of Peach Mountain, accompanied by a sharp sound of friction. Dozens of divine talismans could not cut through the clear light tactical array in a short time, and the clear light tactical array could not pass through the terrifying power of the divine talismans and fall on Ning Quebec. At this moment, a temporary peace and balance were formed between the clear light formation and the divine talismans. At the same time, the cuts on the clear light formation finally revealed the traces of the divine talismans. People on the front yard of Peach Mountain looked at the dozens of divine talismans surrounding the altar and in the air. They could not help but shiver. They did not see any loopholes. There were no divine talismans floating in front of the altar. But Ning Ke had already pulled his iron bow and aimed the iron arrow at that place. The divine halls of West Hill sat in the south facing north. The front yard of Peach Mountain was the only way to go up the mountain. Ning Ke stood in front of the altar and aimed his iron bow at the north. What did he want to do? It would take a long time to describe the battle. But in fact, from the moment the divine hall of light sent Haotian's divine power into Ning Ke's body, to the moment he shot the hierarch and defeated all the powerful enemies, to the moment the divine talismans shocked the Peach Mountain and the clear light array covered everything, it all happened in a flash. Many people died before they knew what happened. The prayers of tens of thousands of believers and thousands of divine priests and deacons were still echoing in the front yard of Peach Mountain. It was dead silent around the altar. Other than the sound of the talismans cutting the clear light array, nothing else could be heard. The powerhouses of the cultivation world retreated to a distance. They looked at Ning Ke standing in front of the altar and the iron bow in his hand. They were shocked and speechless. No one tried to stop him. They could only wait. Talisman Taoism was undoubtedly the most powerful weapon in the cultivation world. For a divine talisman master, it did not make much difference whether he was fighting one enemy or 10. But talisman Taoism had its flaws. No matter how powerful the divine talisman was, it was still limited by distance. Moreover, the talisman spirit could not last forever. As time passed, it would eventually dissipate into nature. Even though they were suffering from Ning Ke's arrows, the national master of the Golden Tribe and Qin Yan were the top figures in the cultivation world. They quickly figured out what was the most important thing to do at this moment. They retreated to a distance away from the attack range of the talismans and waited for the divine talismans in front of the altar and Ning Ke's Haotian's divine power to dissipate. As for the primordial 13 arrows, they could only pray that Ning Ke did not bring too many iron arrows, or that he would not choose them as his next target. There was no other way. After a short silence, an old and angry voice rang out. The second successor of the South Sea, the old divine priest, pointed at the sacred sedan of judgment with his bloodied hand and shouted, "Yi Hongyu, how dare you collude with the Academy?" Previously, when the South Sea challenged the West Hill Divine Palace, Yi Hongyu had killed one of their people. Even this old divine priest, who had an extremely high cultivation state, had lost his finger to her unbelievable methods. He was blaming Yi Hongyu now not because of the previous grudge but because of it. At this moment, only he would pay attention to what Yi Hongyu was doing. Only then did he realize that when all the powerhouses were risking their lives to attack Ning Ke, the sacred sedan of judgment did not move. Yi Hongyu did not attack at all. Now that Ning Ke's talismans were floating around the altar, all the powerhouses were forced to retreat, but the sacred sedan of judgment still did not move. Yi Hongyu was still sitting quietly in the sacred sedan. She was not attacked by the talismans. Ning Ke did not even look at her. Other than colluding with the Academy, what other explanation could there be? Only Ning Ke and Yi Hongyu could explain all this. Ning Ke did not attack her not only because he did not want to, but also because it was part of the Academy's plan. Naturally, he would not explain to the West Hill Divine Palace. Yi Hongyu did not give any explanation. She just looked at a spot with mixed emotions. She was looking at that spot when the powerhouses were attacking Ning Quebec. She was still looking at that spot when Ning Ke used dozens of terrifying divine talismans. She did not fight or dodge. She just looked at that spot without blinking. She looked at the top of the stone steps behind the altar, at the spot where the giant sedan had been. The giant sedan had been broken, and the mysterious hierarch lord had finally shown himself in front of everyone. It was a wretched, skinny, dark and short old Taoist priest. The West Hill hierarch lord's true body looked like this. If it had been any other day, it would definitely have shocked the cultivation world. However, today was the right to light and life and death were at stake. Who would notice this? Even if they did notice it, who would keep watching when it was a matter of life and death? Yi Hongyu kept looking at the hierarch as if to her, this matter was more important than life and death. Ning Ke did not know that she had been looking behind him. This part of the Academy's plan was made by Third Sister. He did not even know the reason. He was thinking about something else. Many things that had happened to him had shocked and confused the powerhouses in the front yard. For example, when did he surpass the threshold of the 5 states? Why did he have Tianqi? Why did he not die after enduring so much Haotian's divine power? It was all because he was himself. He did not break through the 5 realms, but he could use a divine skill above the 5 realms, and he could only use that one divine skill, Tianqi. This was due to the special relationship between him and Haotian. As for why he did not break the 5 states and was not a devout follower of Haotian, it was because of his body and experience that he did not die from the Haotian's divine power. Last year, when he fought with the Abbey Dean on the snow street, the god-stunning array poured all the chi of heaven and earth in Chang and into his body through the array eye pestle. He had endured even more than today. He could survive that day, not to mention today. Ning Ke knew that just like the battle in Chang and the divine power from Haotian was like the natural chi of heaven and earth. It would gradually dissipate and could only last for a while. Moreover, there were not many iron arrows left in the box. If he had an endless supply of iron arrows, he could stand on top of Chang and suppress the whole world. Why would he take the risk to come to Peach Mountain? The divine talisman of Ij floating around the altar would disappear at some point. If the divine talisman could last forever, his master Yen Sei would have already trapped the sword Garrett of South Jin Kingdom. His invincibility could only last for a while. What he needed to do was to complete his mission within this period of time. He looked back at Peach Mountain and the Divine Hall of Light. As he moved, the powerhouses in the front yard suddenly remembered that Lu Bai's sword had entered the Divine Hall of Light. If there was a battle there, it would be the most terrifying one. Because it was a battle between the human world and Haotian. In the Divine Hall of Light, Sang Sang raised her right hand and plucked the dark iron arrow from the air. It was as if the iron arrow had been quietly hanging by her hand, waiting for her to pluck it. Her hand could pluck the stars and cover the moon, let alone an arrow. The iron arrow became dim between her tender white fingers. She threw the iron arrow to the ground and looked at Lu Bai. Lu Bai held the hilt of his sword and looked at her. When they looked at each other, there was no longer a gap between them. Countless messages were passed between them. She knew that this human was known as the most powerful person in the world. If he was given enough time, he could become as powerful as that madman. But now was not the time. According to heaven's design, he should not be able to reach this stage. What had happened to him? And even if he had reached this stage, why didn't he continue to wait for hundreds of years until he was at his strongest? She raised her question to Lu Bai. Lu Bai gave a very serious answer. In front of the Verdant Canyon, I watched Jun Mo and Yi Su's swordsmanship. Li Man asked someone to bring me an aura, which was the Academy's view of the human world. I was enlightened. In Lingang, I saw Yi Su preaching in a shabby alley. In the end, I bathed my sword with hot blood. I was enlightened. It's not easy for an ant to shake a tree. My swordsmanship does not surpass the 5 states. If there is a threshold above the 5 states, I can cut it, even the infinite state. When the sword falls, it cuts myself. Looking at the world, the Abidine is useless. Li Man is not good at fighting. The drunkard and the butcher are just 2 pieces of rotten meat. My swordsmanship is invincible in the human world. That is why I hate them. What hate? I hate not being able to exchange swords with Kohaoren. I hate not being able to drink with Lotus. I hate not being able to be born 1,000 years ago and fight against the light in the wilderness. I hate not being able to be in the same generation as the headmaster. My predecessor has already passed away and the latter has yet to arrive. I want to draw my sword and challenge the heavens. However, the gate of the divine kingdom has been destroyed and there is no way to ascend to heaven. Lu Bai looked at her in front of the sword and said, I don't miss heaven and earth. I just want to cry. At this time you came to the human world. How can I not come? It's not easy for an ant to shake a tree. Why do you dare to come to the Peach Mountain? This is heaven's question. I am invincible in the human world. Who else can I fight but heaven? This was the answer of the sword of the human world. What is the purpose of human cultivation? In the words of Haotian Taoism, it is a gift from Haotian. But for the academy and people like Lu Bai, cultivation has nothing to do with Haotian. It is just a means to make human beings stronger. At the end of cultivation they will raise their swords to heaven. Kohaoren did it. The headmaster had been doing it for 1,000 years. The academy was still doing it. Now it was the turn of the most powerful sword in the human world. Lu Bai was a sword. The sword in his hand used to be the most powerful sword in the human world. Now he had become a sword and merged with the sword of the human world used by the headmaster. How powerful would he be? This had never happened in the history of cultivation. As he said, he did not break through the 5 states. In the past he did not dare to break through. Later he did not care. Now he did not care. Since he was a sword, if there was a threshold in front of him, he would cut it. As for whether the sword would fall on him, as she said, he did not care. Because to him this was the only thing that was interesting. Hundreds of disciples knelt in front of the sword Garrett of South Jin Kingdom thousands of miles away. The black sword-like mountain suddenly left the ground and pierced the sky. The disciples were shocked. When they looked up, they found that the sword peak was still in the same place. The divine hall of light shook uneasily and the sword style was awe-inspiring. Countless sword marks appeared on the hard bluestone walls. The lamp that had been extinguished for months suddenly broke into 3 pieces. The autumn wind blew from below the precipice and broke into pieces when it reached the balcony. It was like a spring breeze that tickled one's heart. The itch was unbearable. It was not the itch of excitement, but the desire to see Tao. Sang Sang stood on the balcony and looked at Lu Bai quietly. Lu Bai held the sword in his right hand and pushed it forward. He was full of joy. I'm in a much better state today. I feel good writing this chapter. I'm full of joy. I'm going to walk the dog. I'll try to finish the next chapter before 12:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 893. The edge of the sword went in another inch. Lu Bai's sword was 2 inches into Song Song's world. In front of Hao Yin, a short distance was the end of the world. This meant that his sword had already traveled tens of thousands of miles. Lu Bai was not the first person in the human world to challenge Hao Yin, but he was the one closest to Hao Yin. It was not because he was stronger than Kohaoren or the headmaster, but because Hao Yin was in the human world. Heaven and man should be separated forever, but there must be a big barrier between them. In this battle in the divine hall of light, it was the invisible barrier. That was Song Song's small world. How could Lu Bai's sword pierce into her small world? That was because his sword contained the peak of the sword garret of South Jin Kingdom and the narrow streets in Linggong. It contained the memory of the headmaster slaying dragons and gods in the wilderness, the aura of the human world sent by the academy, decades of hard work, the courage of all the defiance of heaven and the boundless world. He used the boundless world to break heaven. Hearing the prayers coming from the foot of the mountain, Sang Sang waved her sleeves and a breeze blew down the peach mountain. She turned a blind eye to the sword that was getting closer and closer to her. Lu Bai's sword was corroding at a speed visible to the naked eye. The bright blade became dim and a layer of greenish-red rust appeared like a cocoon. The rust continued to spread into the sword. She was the rule of this world. Even though she could not reverse the cause and effect, she could perfectly control the most basic and powerful rules in her own small world. These were her weapons. She used time to face the boundless world between Lu Bai's sword. No matter how prosperous the human world was, there would be a moment when the everlasting night came. No matter how green the mountains were, there would be a time when the autumn wind blew and leaves fell. Those great, brave, elegant, and worldly things were all weak in front of time. Lu Bai's sword moved another inch. The inch of blade that entered Song Song's small world instantly showed signs of rust. His sword was getting closer to her. His sword was being eroded by time. This was the closest she had been to the human world since she came to the human world. The distance between heaven and man was less than 3 inches. She did not know that Lu Bai's human sword was 1 inch closer to her. Or did she see the human sword as a rusty iron rod at the bottom of the river? A gust of wind blew out of the divine hall of light and landed in the front yard of Peach Mountain. The sect leader's shoulder was heavily injured and was currently bleeding profusely. When the cool breeze brushed past it, the bleeding stopped, and then it slowly recovered at a speed visible to the naked eye. New flesh grew out continuously. The powerful cultivators who had been seriously injured by Ning Ke felt refreshed by the breeze. Especially those devout followers of Hao Yin except Qin Yan, they found that their injuries were recovering. The dead in the pool of blood could not be resurrected, but those who were still alive felt the mercy and love of Hao Yin, and felt the miraculous power. Therefore, the prayers of tens of thousands of people became more pious and orderly, filled with awe for God and faith in the light. The great array of clear light of the West Hill Divine Palace seemed ordinary. It was first broken by Lu Bai's sword and then by Tang Xiaotong's iron rod. At this moment, it had shrunk to a radius of 100 feet. Its true power was revealed in the prayers. Because of the great array of clear light, Ning Ke could not kill all the powerful cultivators in the front yard. He did not have enough iron arrows, nor could he write more divine talismans. The altar was empty except for Ning Ke, Qin Pipi and Tang Xiaotang, as well as the lonely divine hall of judgment. Everyone including the hierarch stayed far away. No one dared to stand in front of his iron arrows. Looking from the altar to the north, it was obvious that there was an empty passage. Logically speaking, Ning Ke should have left. If he was alone, no one could stop him now that Hao Yin's divine power was invincible. But he did not take the risk to leave Chang and then come to the West Hill Divine Palace just to kill a few powerful cultivators for the academy. What he wanted to do had just begun and was far from over. Moreover, Qin Pipi and Tang Xiaotang were still in front of the altar. Ning Ke felt that the Hao Yin divine power in his body was slowly draining away. Even though the rate was not fast, if this continued, there would be a moment when his divine power would be exhausted. That each talisman floating around the altar and in the sky was swaying in the wind. He did not know how long it could last. He did not turn around and said to Qin Pipi, "Let's go." It was a simple word and an unquestionable arrangement. Qin Pipi did not hesitate and walked down the altar. He supported Tang Xiaotang, who was covered in blood, and walked out of the Peach Mountain. He did not even look back at Ning Quebec. Tang Xiaotang was confused and asked, "What about youngest uncle?" Chin Pipi still did not look back. He panted and said, "If we still want to save him, it will be a waste of energy. Moreover, this is the West Hill Divine Palace. His life and death cannot be decided by man, only by heaven." His ocean of chi and mountain of snow were locked. Coupled with his obesity, his physical quality was even worse than that of an ordinary person. He walked too fast while supporting Tang Xiaotang and was panting heavily. Tang Xiaotang did not understand his explanation, but she knew the relationship between Chin Pipi and Ning Quebec. She took out an elixir and swallowed it. Then she carried Chin Pipi on her back. She had cultivated in the Devil's Doctrine and had a strong recovery ability. Moreover, she had taken the elixir made by 11th Uncle Wang Chi. Although she was still weak, she was much faster than Chin Pipi. She knew that Ning Ke had taken a great risk to buy time. Therefore, she carried Chin Pipi on her back and rushed out of the front yard without hesitation. Compared to her petite body, Chin Pipi looked like a fat bear in winter. From the back he could not see her at all, which was a little funny. Ning Ke stood in front of the altar and could not help laughing at the scene. The iron bow in his hand was still steady and the iron arrow on the string did not move at all. No one dared to stand in front of the arrow. In front of Ning Ke's iron arrow was an empty path that no one dared to enter. This path was the most dangerous for enemies but the safest for allies. No cultivator dared to stop Tang Xiaotang and Chin Pipi. Even the most devout people from the South Sea did not dare to do so. This was the deterrence of the primordial 13 arrows. But the cavalrymen of the divine halls of West Hill did not think so. They were used to life and death on the battlefield. They were devout and zealous protectors of the sect. They did not care about their own life and death. Moreover, they had a large number of cavalrymen. No matter how powerful the primordial 13 arrows were, how many could they kill? The wind blew and dust rose from the mountain path in the distance. Ning Ke could guess what was going to happen. He shouted, "Lu Yiqing?" No one on the front yard of Peach Mountain understood why he would suddenly call out the people from the Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom at such a critical moment. Yi Hongyu might have understood, but she was not in the mood to think about it. Lu Yiqing and the disciples of the Sword Garret did not participate in this earth-shattering battle. On the one hand, although he was a great sword master in the Knowing Destiny state, he was still far from the Hierarch Lord or Qin Yan. On the other hand, they did not know what to do. The Sage of Sword, Lu Bai, was a visiting professor of the Divine Halls of West Hill. The Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom had always regarded itself as a part of Taoism. Although they were too proud to submit completely to the Divine Halls of West Hill, they had never thought of betraying them. The South Jin Kingdom and the Tang Empire were mortal enemies. There was no kindness between the Sword Garret and the Academy, only hatred. Logically speaking, they should be on the side of Taoism. However, Lu Bai's sword had entered the Divine Hall of Light. Everyone knew what this meant. Lu Yiqing asked in a low voice, "What is it?" Ning Ke said, "Leave with the Academy." The disciples of the Sword Garret did not know what to do. If they did not leave now, the Divine Halls of West Hill would definitely hold the Sword Garret accountable. But if they left with the people from the Academy, wouldn't it be announcing to the world that the Sword Garret had betrayed Taoism and sided with the Tang Empire? They looked at Lu Yiqing. The Sage of Sword was doing something outrageous in the Divine Hall of Light. They could only wait for Lu Yiqing to make the most important decision. The situation was tense and they did not have much time to think. Lu Yiqing closed his eyes and felt the faint sword style coming from the Divine Hall on the peak. He stomped his feet and shouted, "Let's go." The disciples of the Sword Garret looked uncertain. But they finally made up their minds. They kowtowed to the Divine Hall of Light 3 times and rushed out of the front yard of Peach Mountain. Soon they met up with Tang Xiaotang, who was carrying Chin Pipi on her back. Since they left on the same path, they were on the same path. The cavalrymen of the Divine Halls of West Hill were already in formation on the mountain path. The disciples of the Sword Garret pressed their hands on the hilts of their swords and looked solemn. Some of their eyes were already red. Protect the seniors from the Academy. Lu Yiqing was supported by his younger brother. He held the hilt of his sword and tilted his head to listen to the hoofbeats coming from the front. He thought of his brother who was fighting in the Divine Hall of Light behind him. He shouted tragically, "Anyone who stands in our way will die." Although the cavalrymen of the Divine Halls of West Hill were powerful, they had been defeated by Tang Xiaotang and had witnessed many unbelievable situations. How could they be a match for the disciples of the South Jin Kingdom who were determined to die? Especially when Lu Yiqing and Tang Xiaotang fought with their lives, they were quickly defeated. The sword chi on the mountain path gradually faded away. Only the hoofbeats and the painful groans of the injured cavalrymen could be heard. The prayers on the front yard did not stop but became much lower. The people of the divine halls of West Hill and the guests who attended the rite to light still could not believe what they saw. The hatred between the academy and the sword garret was as deep as the ocean. Jun Mo's right arm was cut off by Liu Bai and Liu Yiqing's eyes were blinded by Ning Quebec. Why did the sword garret and the academy join hands after Ning Ke said a few words? That was because they could not understand. For the academy and the sword garret, losing an eye and losing an arm was normal. Since the battle was fair, the ending should be fair too. As for the alliance between the academy and the sword garret, it actually started when Qiao Shaoshu visited the sword garret and confirmed that Liu Bai's sword had flown up the Peach Mountain. The disciples of the academy and the sword garret had already left. Ning Ke was alone in the front yard of the Peach Mountain. In the eyes of others, he should have looked a little lonely, but he seemed to have become even more terrifying. Because he no longer had anything to worry about, he could do whatever he wanted, he could start doing what he wanted to do. So he raised the iron arrow. After the Tianqi, his power had far exceeded the scope of the human world. The bowstring was pulled to the fullest as if it was about to break. The arrowhead did not tremble at all. It pointed coldly and terrifyingly to the north. There is one more chapter. Try to finish it before 2:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 894. What was the most famous and terrifying weapon in the cultivation world? It was not the headmaster's cudgel, Kaharan's sword, the chief preaching monk's iron staff or the abbey dean's psyche. It was a bow and arrow. In the eyes of future generations, the primordial 13 arrows was undoubtedly a milestone weapon. Its power was so great that it made people speechless. It was a pity that only the Academy and the Tang Empire could create such a weapon, and only Ning Ke, a freak who cultivated both Taoism and talisman, could use such a weapon. The primordial 13 arrows ignored space and even seemed to break free from the shackles of time. The iron arrow was made of the toughest material in the world. How powerful would it be when it was fully released? When Ning Ke was in the see-through state, he could cripple Long Qing with one arrow. When he was in the knowing destiny state, he could make all the powerhouses in the Lank Temple flee. Today he had entered the Tianqi state and killed more than 10 powerhouses from the divine halls of West Hill with one arrow. He had even driven the hierarch Lord crazy. No one could completely avoid the primordial 13 arrows in the Tianqi state. Other than the chief preaching monk of Shenkong Temple, no one could. At least not the people in front of Peach Mountain. Looking at the bow in Ning Ke's hand and the dark iron arrow, the people on the front yard of Peach Mountain felt a chill run down their spines. Some even felt weak in the knees. They could not imagine what they would do if the arrow was aimed at them or even if it was aimed at them. They had never thought that they would face the threat of such a terrifying iron arrow at such a close distance. But in fact it was also a kind of luck. The real power of the primordial 13 arrows came from its silence and unpredictability. Because it could fly through the air with talisman intent, there was no such thing as range. Therefore distance was not a concern. In fact, the farther away the better. Everything was relative. There was no such thing as a perfect weapon in this world. The primordial 13 arrows also had a flaw. Or rather, the flaw lay in Ning Ke who held the bow. The farther the distance, the more powerful the primordial 13 arrows would be. But the problem was that if the distance was too far, beyond the limits of human vision, he would not be able to aim at the target. Xia Ho's tall and burly body would become the tiniest dot from thousands of miles away. No human could see him with the naked eye, not even the headmaster. Back in Tianqi Mountain, Ning Ke was able to shoot Long Qing from more than 10 miles away with his psyche power instead of his eyes. Long Qing's misfortune was that he had just seen through the confinement made of firewood and was about to enter the knowing destiny state. He was as bright as the sun in Ning Ke's sense of perception. With Ning Ke's current cultivation state, if he wanted to aim at a target far away, he needed to be at least at the peak of the knowing destiny state and completely release his state. It would be best if he could break through the realm. Who would release their full power at the exact moment he drew his bow? Why should the target coordinate with his aim? Who would break through the realm when Ning Ke was shooting arrows? It was not every day that someone broke through the realm in the cultivation world, not to mention the moment when he shot the arrow. Not everyone would be as unlucky as Long Qing. Although the powerhouses present were not very clear about the secrets of the primordial 13 arrows, they had vaguely deduced some principles from the experience of fighting with Ning Ke over the years. Therefore, when they saw him draw his bow to the fullest, they were extremely nervous and anxious and wanted to know who he was going to shoot. Where would his iron arrow be shot to? Ning Ke raised his iron bow and looked to the north quietly. He was not looking with his eyes, but with the psyche power in his sense of perception. He was using his psyche power to perceive the world, and the projection of the world became an ocean in his consciousness. This ocean was the entire human world. There were a few light spots in the ocean. There was a thick and bright light spot in the extreme west, and the light spot in the northeast was even bigger and brighter. Only by looking closely could one find that there were actually 3 light spots there. There were also light spots around him, especially the unfathomable sea of light behind him. Ning Ke was now in the Tianqi state. Excluding some cultivators who might be breaking through the realm, these light spots that he could sense belonged to the powerhouses. The brighter the light spot, the higher the state of that person was. The unfathomable sea of light behind him was, of course, her. She was so bright that she had completely covered Lu Bai's aura. The thick and bright light spot in the extreme northwest was, of course, the chief preaching monk of Shenkong Temple. The 3 light spots in the northeast were, of course, the eldest brother, the drunkard, and the butcher. All the powerhouses were in his eyes. At this moment he seemed to have become the high-end version of the Reet hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane. This was unreasonable because he was not in Tomes of Arcane, but a human being. There was no reason for the human world to become the ocean in his consciousness. Many years ago, on the journey from the city of Wei to Chang, and Liu Qingchen, the guide of Ning Ke's cultivation, had a conversation with him. During that conversation, Ning Ke said that when he was meditating in his dream, he once felt a sea. At that time, Liu Qingchen thought that was just a dream, and that he had no potential for cultivation. Because during the initial awareness state, the range of one's perception of heaven and earth was the size of a cultivator's potential. In the recorded history, Lu Bai had the strongest perception at the initial awareness state. When Lu Bai was at the initial awareness state, he saw a magnificent yellow river. How could Ning Ke see a sea? But now he really saw a sea at the foot of the Peach Mountain. I think I'm the sea, Ning Ke said to himself. During these years after he could cultivate, he had recalled the conversation with Liu Qingchen many times. It was not until this year that he realized that it was all because of Sang Sang. When he was meditating in his dream, he held Sang Sang in his arms. With Haoyan in his arms, he could feel the entire human world. So what? Today he came to the Peach Mountain and endured the Tianqi. Haoyan's divine power entered his body, and he reconnected with Sang Sang, which was equivalent to holding her in his arms again. Then why couldn't he feel the sea in the human world? Could it be that he wanted to shoot at the light spots in the sea? The chief preaching monk of the Shenkong Temple, the drunkard, or the butcher? No one knew. Ning Ke, who was standing in front of the Peach Mountain, could feel the entire human world. But before that, the entire human world had already felt him. Because of that grand Tianqi. In the small town at the border of Song and Yen, the calligraphy and painting shop was filled with the aroma of wine. There was only a bowl of water on the table in front of the eldest brother, but he looked as happy as if he was drinking fine wine. Because he knew that the youngest brother was still alive. The drunkard's voice was unusually hoarse. How could the divine power of Haoyan enter a mortal's body? The eldest brother said, "My youngest brother can't be reasoned with by common sense." The drunkard suddenly raised his eyebrows. The flagon tied to his waist moved even though there was no wind, and it even floated to a position parallel to the ground. His clothes suddenly blurred as if he could disappear at any moment. He did not know that Ning Ke was aiming at him in front of the Peach Mountain, but he felt the danger. The eldest brother said, "You are too fast, so you will not be his target." The drunkard thought of the previous conversation and his expression gradually turned serious. "You just said, the butcher is very slow. 2 chapters tomorrow? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 895. There were 4 pig trotters on the chopping board. The trotters had been de-haired and watered. They looked like tender lotus roots that had just been plucked from the mud. A thick knife slid across the chopping board. The yellow straw paper unfolded like lotus leaves. The 4 trotters fell into the paper and rolled up. The butcher handed the wrapped trotters to the waiting lad without saying anything. Li Guangdi took out some copper coins and placed them on the table outside the butcher's shop. Then he turned around and walked out. Suddenly the butcher felt something and looked up. His eyes passed through the smoke-blackened wall and looked in the direction of the West Hill Divine Kingdom in the south. His face suddenly turned pale. The big white pig hanging on the iron hook behind the butcher's shop suddenly moved. The butcher's knife also trembled. There was no wind, but there was a whistling sound. The butcher held the knife and looked in the direction of the West Hill Divine Kingdom. He understood something. So he lifted the thick and oily knife as fast as he could and held it with both hands. He covered his face so that no wind or anything else could penetrate it. The big white pig hanging on the iron hook was still swaying. The blood in the pig's abdomen was shaken out and dripped to the ground. It sounded like a clock. Time passed slowly. Nothing happened. The butcher squatted in the corner with his back bent. He held the thick knife with both hands and covered his face, like a turtle hiding in its shell. Outside the butcher's shop, Li Guangdi and Zhang Yanzu walked toward the calligraphy and painting shop. If they got closer, they could hear one of them mumbling something as if he was memorizing something. Zhang Yanzu asked nervously, "Did you see anything wrong?" "Don't talk." Li Guangdi looked very nervous. He stared at him and said, "And don't think about taking notes and paper. Just remember it with your brain." Zhang Yanzu shut his mouth tightly and didn't say anything else. Li Guangdi recalled the scene he had seen and guessed that the butcher's weakness was his face. The 4 pig trotters wrapped in yellow straw paper were swinging in the hands of the 2 lads. They looked no different from the human arms cut off by the butcher. In the front yard of Peach Mountain, thousands of miles away, Ning Kei's iron arrow was no longer aimed at the small town at the border of Song and Yen, but at the northwest. The drunkard and the butcher were in that small town. They were the Academy's most feared opponents and also the biggest threat to Chang'an City. He really wanted to see if he could kill them. However, these 2 were great cultivators who had experienced the everlasting night after all. To be able to successfully hide from Haotian for tens of thousands of years, one could imagine how profound their realms were and how powerful their concealment techniques were. Cultivators in the knowing destiny state would have an almost intuitive sense of the possible turning points in their lives, not to mention the drunkard and the butcher. When Ning Kei raised his iron bow and aimed at the town, the drunkard and the butcher sensed it immediately and responded accordingly. The drunkard was ready to leave while the butcher raised his butcher knife. After the Abbey Dean became disabled, the drunkard became the fastest person in the world. He was even faster than the eldest brother. He was in the distanceless state and had infinite skills. It was hard to kill him unless he was trapped. The butcher had always been the most powerful person in the world. No one, not even Yu Lian, could be mentioned in the same breath as the chief preaching monk of the Shenkong Temple in terms of strength and physical strength. The drunkard was ready to leave and the butcher raised his knife. Ning Kei's primordial 13 arrows could not kill them. Since it could not kill them, he could not shoot them. It was not because he had too few iron arrows and they were too precious. For the Academy, they were willing to pay any price if they could kill the drunkard and the butcher. The reason why Ning Kei did not shoot them was simple. Since he could not kill them, he would not shoot them. He seldom did things that he was not absolutely sure of and that required great risks. The so-called risk, of course, was not to kill them but to anger them. He could not help but feel a little regretful, but not too much. Because the Academy had always wanted to try, but they had never lost their cool. It was a wish but not an ambition. And the Academy had already made arrangements for the drunkard and the butcher. The iron arrow in Ning Kei's hand was aimed at the northwest, which should be Qinghe Prefecture. As the iron arrow moved slowly, the atmosphere in the front yard of Peach Mountain became more and more tense. Until then, no one knew who he was going to shoot. In fact, even Ning Kei himself did not know. In his perception, Qinghe Prefecture was just an inconspicuous area in the vast sea of the human world. There was no bright spot there. Suddenly, a spot of light appeared in his eyes. So he loosened the bowstring. Jun Imo and Mu Yu stood by the Fuchin River, looking at the magnificent gardens across the river. After a long silence, he asked, "Do you understand?" Mu Yu took out the embroidery needle from the cloth and said, "It's a bit troublesome, but not difficult." Jun Imo said, "Then let's go." Mu Yu listened to the chanting from across the river. She frowned and said, "Youngest brother's plan has nothing to do with the 2 of us." Jun Imo said, "He underestimated the warlords. Wang Jinglu could not have done it." In the original plan of the Academy, Ning Kei would go to the West Hill, eldest brother would go to the small town, and second brother, who was seriously injured in the Verdant Canyon, should stay in Chang and to ensure the safety of the rear. But now he was in Qinghe Prefecture, which meant that the Academy was empty. At this time, Wang Jinglu was in the Chui Garden by the Fuchin River. Today, the bigwigs of the Qinghe Prefecture gathered together because the West Hill Divine Palace was holding the right to light. Because of the tense situation in the prefecture, many of them could not go to the Peach Mountain to worship, so they chose to hold the ceremony in the Chui Garden. He entered the Chui Garden through Chui Huaxing. Looking at the pious bigwigs of the warlords by the river, he frowned. Until now, he still could not figure out who his target was. The Qinghe Prefecture was ruled by the families. The families relied on history and family rules. But the real reason why Qinghe Prefecture dared to betray Chang and was because of the two knowing destiny masters by the Fuchin River. Not many people knew who the two knowing destiny masters of the Qinghe Prefecture were. Even Wang Jinglu did not know. Even if he knew, it would be difficult for him to complete the task given to him by Ning Quebec. At this moment, a wind came from the south. The wind was not as wet as the great swamp. The few cultivators in the garden felt a sense of holiness. The autumn flowers by the river were covered with a faint luster, looking especially holy. There was an old man under the roofed corridor. He was an unknown person from the branch of the Song family. He was already old and had been dozing off. But now he suddenly opened his eyes. The divine talisman moved the Peach Mountain and the Tianqi shocked the world. All the cultivators knew that something big had happened on the Peach Mountain because they felt the qi of heaven and earth changing drastically. The accuracy of this perception depended on the state of the cultivator. Grand cultivators like the drunkard and the butcher could naturally sense it more clearly. But Wang Jinglu, who was at the peak of the see-through state, could only guess roughly. It was enough for him to guess roughly. According to the agreement between them, as soon as he sensed this, it would be the time to act. Wang Jinglu had been watching all the movements in the field. Looking at this scene, his heart skipped a beat. He knew that he had finally found one. But how could he force the opponent to release all of his state? He was known to be invincible among those below the knowing destiny state. But just as Chin Pippi had said, he was invincible among those below the knowing destiny state. A cultivator in the knowing destiny state did not have to release all of his state when facing him. At this moment, a man wearing a bamboo hat and a walking stick and a woman dressed in red appeared by the stream of the Chui Garden on the banks of the Fuchin River. No one could clearly see how they had appeared. Urgent alarms sounded in the Chui Garden. The sound of scabbards colliding could be heard everywhere. An ancient array was slowly released from the pond in the garden. The old man of the Song family slowly raised his head and looked at the man and woman by the stream. Junimo did not look at the old man of the Song family. Although he knew that the old man was one of the knowing destiny state that his younger brother was looking for, he was not the one he was looking for. The one he was looking for was even more powerful. The Chui family of Riyang was the head of the 7 families in Qinghe County. The Chui Garden was their property. The head of the family, Chui Shi, was naturally the one with the highest status. But today in the Chui Garden he could only stand. Because Elder Chui was sitting, he as his son could only stand. Elder Chui had once been a Grand Secretary in Chang'an and a Prime Minister. When he retired he was given the title of Grand Tutor. That was why he sat in the Grand Tutor's chair and drank Grand Secretary's tea. Looking at the man and woman by the stream, Elder Chui slowly put down the tea in his hand. His face revealed a complicated expression. There was some confusion, some fear and some mockery. Seeing the man's empty sleeves, he knew the man's identity. Elder Chui did not expect that the academy would disregard the agreement with the West Hill Divine Palace and send someone to Qinghe County. He did not expect it to be this person. In a very short time he woke up from his confusion. He remembered that the headmaster he feared the most had already ascended to heaven. The academy was no longer the academy of the past. If it was in the past, I think I would not have the courage to fight Mr. Second. Elder Chui looked at Junimo by the stream. His expression gradually became calm. He said, "But you have lost an arm and have not recovered from your injuries. How can you be my opponent?" With these words, the array in the Chui Garden exploded. It was indeed a family with a long history. The array by the Fuchin River was indeed powerful. The aura of heaven and earth was chilling. Junimo knew that this person's judgment of the situation was correct. If it was in the past, he would have killed all the enemies in the garden with his iron sword alone. But now, he might not even be this person's opponent. But he did not say anything, nor did he do anything. Muyu picked up an embroidery needle and pierced it into an autumn lotus in the stream. Her movements were very natural, as if she had done it unintentionally. Elder Chui's expression suddenly changed. The terrifying array by the Fuchin River had been broken in the wind. The families of Qinghe County indeed had a very rich history. They had existed even longer than the academy. But that did not mean that they were powerful. Otherwise the tortoise would have long ruled the world. Muyu was the bride. She was the 7th sister who loved to eat melon seeds, chat and play cards. She was also the world's most talented array master. She had observed the array for half a day by the Fuchin River and had long seen through it. Junimo looked at Elder Chui quietly. Elder Chui looked at him and said indifferently, "When I was the Prime Minister, I went to the academy many times and saw you as a child. I never thought that I would kill you today." Qinghe County still had many spies in Chang'an. Elder Chui was very sure that Junimo had not recovered from his injuries. More importantly, no one knew that he was not only in the knowing destiny state, but also at the peak of the knowing destiny state. Although the big array by the Fuchin River had been easily broken by the girl from the academy, Elder Chui was still confident that he could kill Junimo by the stream. Wang Jinglu's face became abnormally pale in the crowd. He could not help but be shocked when he saw Mr. Second appear. He was even more shocked when he realized that Elder Chui was the knowing destiny state cultivator he had been searching for. According to Ning Kei's plan, he should have made a move now. However, to make a knowing destiny state cultivator release his full state, he needed a sufficiently powerful person to use powerful means. But from Elder Chui's tone, he seemed to have endless confidence in defeating Mr. Second of the Academy. How could he do it? Junimo did not make a move either. He only took a step forward. Elder Chui's expression suddenly froze. The elder of the Song household under the corridor stood up with his sword in his arms. Although everyone knew that Junimo had lost an arm and his state was not what it used to be, he was still Junimo. Qinghe County was very close to the Verdant Canyon. The scene of Junimo single-handedly fighting 10,000 people in the Battle of the Verdant Canyon at the end of last year was like a nightmare imprinted in people's souls. No one dared to underestimate Junimo. Even if Lu Bai were to fight Junimo now, he would definitely treat him as his most powerful enemy. Elder Chui's aura suddenly rose to the peak of the knowing destiny state. He looked at Junimo and said with a smile, "Are you surprised?" Junimo looked at him and said, "I am surprised by your stupidity." The wind suddenly blew, the Fuchin River was chaotic, the stream in the Chui garden was boiling, and the autumn lotus floated like a dead fish. An arrow came from the south. Elder Chui's face suddenly paled and then it collapsed. He became hundreds of pieces of flesh and blood, scattered all over the Chui garden. Because of the academy, Elder Chui had kept a low profile his entire life, keeping his cultivation state a secret until he was 100 years old. Until today, when Junimo came to the Chui garden, he felt that the opportunity had finally come. He wanted to give the academy a surprise. He wanted to show the edge that he had endured for many years, and he wanted to vent the anger that he had suppressed for so many years. And so he died without an accident. From the beginning to the end, he did not have the chance to fight with Junimo. Because Junimo did not make a move. He only took a step forward. He only needed to take a step forward, and his opponent would have to show his full state. Because he was Junimo. The elder of the Song family saw Elder Chui turn into countless pieces of flesh and blood, and his expression became abnormally terrified. He had been stuck at the lower level of the short life state for all these years, and he was still one of the few powerhouses in the world. However, he saw Junimo just take a step forward, and Elder Chui, who was at the peak of the knowing destiny state, died on the spot. How could he still have the courage? Junimo turned to look at him. The elder of the Song family let out a shrill cry and forced out all his state in despair. The sword in his arms broke through the air. He was only at the lower level of the knowing destiny state. Even if he forced out all his state, he was still not bright enough in someone's sea of consciousness. So there was no second iron arrow from the south. Junimo stretched out his left hand and clenched it slightly in the autumn wind. The flying sword suddenly turned in the air and pierced deeply into the chest of the elder of the Song family. Let me say a few words to everyone. It has nothing to do with canvassing for votes. Yesterday I said 2 chapters, and today's chapter is more than 4,000 words. I really can't write anymore because I need to think clearly about some problems. I thought I had written well recently. I finished earlier last night, so I went back and read it again. In the end, I found that many of the chapters were terrible, really terrible, and I couldn't even find an excuse. I was a little dissatisfied, so I went to read the first volume of The Coming of Night. I found that the first volume was better, but the first few chapters were so dull and stale. Then I went to the second volume, Possessed by the Devil, and found that it was so long. I was still dissatisfied, so I read my favorite Battle of the Verdant Canyon. Only then did I realize that Junimo and Lu Bai's fight was so troublesome. I actually used so many damn short sentences and so many repetitive words. So I had insomnia again. It was pure discomfort. I didn't know why it was like this. I really had a problem with my emotions. It turned out that I didn't write as well as I thought I could. I used to think that I wrote very well. I always thought that this was what I was best at and what I was most proud of. But today I felt that it was really bad, really bad. You don't need to comfort me, I can see it myself. This was a problem of seriousness, time, and ability. If one's ability was not good, it would be difficult to improve in a short period of time. The first 2 should be able to improve, so all the problems were ultimately my own problems. It was a problem of attitude and diligence. I didn't know why I thought so. Maybe after a few days I would feel that the coming of night was especially good. Was it just a period of self-doubt? But I was really depressed. I felt that it was really bad and I didn't want it to be like this. Tomorrow was the 4th of Saturday. Originally, I thought that it would be double, so I wanted to postpone my leave until later. But now that I was in such a bad mood, I didn't want my monthly vote anymore. Tomorrow I would rest as usual and reflect on myself. At night I saw another book review. I found out that the reader, Shooting Bird, had passed away in a car accident in March. His wife posted a post in the book review section, saying that he had been looking forward to writing The Coming of Night until August. I replied that I would write well, so I would definitely write well in the future, better than the previous ones. Cherish the present, we can't waste life. May he rest in peace and may his wife live a happy life. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 896. The Song family elder felt a chill in his chest. He looked at his flying sword stuck in the ground and saw the blood flowing down the blade. His heart grew cold. Only now did he truly understand that even if he had not recovered from his serious injuries, he would never be a match for Junimo. Junimo did not even truly attack. He just reached out in the autumn wind and grabbed his life-bond sword and took his life. There was dead silence by the Chui garden. The splashing on the Fuchin River had also stopped. The Song family elder slowly fell down. Junimo held his cane and left with Muyu. No one dared to move. Wang Jinglu had been standing in the crowd and did not have a chance to make a move. He looked at the blood and flesh splattered around the historical armchair and thought of Elder Chui, who had turned into a resentful spirit. He then realized that Ning Kei's arrow was like that. He looked at the Song family elder lying in a pool of blood and the flying sword in his chest. He then realized that Mr. Second's sword was like that. It was not until a long time after Junimo and Muyu had left the Chui garden that the people in the garden woke up from their extreme fear and shock. There were cries and angry roars everywhere. To Qinghe County the warlords were everything. The Chui family of Riyang was the people's spirit. Elder Chui's position here was like that of the headmaster of the academy. Now that Elder Chui, whom everyone relied on, had turned into a pile of flesh and blood without doing anything, how could they not be afraid? The news of Elder Chui's death quickly spread throughout Yangzhou City and entered thousands of households. Naturally, Chang'an also received news of the Kingdom of Wind. The Tang Imperial Court reacted very quickly. On that night, the Ministry of Works urgently transferred craftsmen from the 3 counties in the south and south, as well as soldiers from the neighboring states, to the north of the Verdant Canyon. Countless enemies were buried in the Verdant Canyon during the war last autumn. The official road was blocked by huge rocks and was extremely difficult to walk on. The Imperial Court had spent more than half a year clearing a small path. However, with the arrival of tens of thousands of craftsmen and soldiers, the clearing speed suddenly increased. Based on the current speed, it would only take a few months at most for Chang'an to complete the initial cleanup and restoration work. This also meant that the Tang Empire's iron cavalry would only need a few months to pass through the Verdant Canyon and rush south. Like an iron current, they would directly drown Qinghe Prefecture. The nobles and people in Qinghe Prefecture did not know what was happening in the north of the Verdant Canyon, but they knew very well what Old Master Chui's death meant to them. The treaty between the Tang Empire and the West Hill Divine Palace had become a waste paper. The Tang Empire's army could appear in Qinghe Prefecture at any time. The terrifying pressure from the north was like a low-level dark cloud, pressing down on the people of Qinghe Prefecture and making it difficult for them to breathe. They could not understand why the Tang Empire did not seem to need a breather after having just experienced an extremely tragic war to defend their country. They wanted to tear up the peace treaty so quickly. The chaos in Qinghe County had already appeared, and it was impossible for it to calm down. Wang Jinglu did not leave Yangzhou City because he wanted to wait for Chui Huaxing here. Most importantly, he was responsible for receiving the cultivators from the Imperial Center Administration and military spies who were constantly sneaking into Qinghe Prefecture from the Tang Empire. Then he would use these forces to help Chui Huaxing occupy a better position in the chaos of Qinghe Prefecture. A cylindrical passageway appeared in the air above the front yard of Peach Mountain. Afterimages of turbulence lingered in this passageway, making the passageway even clearer. This was the trace left by the iron arrow, which was also the path of the arrow. Ning Kei stood in front of the altar, holding the bow in his left hand and holding the arrow with his right hand. He was still in the posture of the moment when he released the bowstring, as stable as a wooden statue. The prayers had stopped. The tens of thousands of people in the front yard looked at him nervously. No one spoke, as if they had also become wooden statues. No one knew where Ning Kei's iron arrow had gone, but they knew that someone had definitely died. They did not see the real ending, but they already knew the ending, which made them extremely terrified. Ning Kei put the iron bow back on his shoulder and looked back at the divine hall of light on the top of Peach Mountain in silence. If the Haotian's divine power in his body dissipated, the divine talisman around the altar would also return to heaven and earth. Then he would definitely die under the siege of those powerful cultivators. But he did not think about this. At this time, he had already completed the first half of the Academy's plan. His attention was now on the divine hall of light. He could vaguely feel the ending of the battle in the divine hall, and he knew that someone would definitely die. Just like how people on the front yard knew that someone would definitely die when they saw him shoot the arrow, now that someone had entered the divine hall of light, he would definitely die. This made him a little depressed. In this battle between heaven and man, the one who died was naturally heaven. Sang Sang looked at the boundless universe on the sword. In her eyes, there were stars vanishing and disappearing, sunrise and sunset, rising and falling tides, and countless seasons passing by in the human world. Lu Bai's sword was only 2 feet away from her. The rust on the sword was getting more and more severe, and its surface appeared to be an ominous gray color, which meant that the sword had completely rusted and was beginning to be weathered. The closer an object was to her body, the faster time flowed in the area where it was located, and the more severe the damage would be. Even a sword that could withstand countless years of wind and rain could not withstand it. It was already very unimaginable that Lu Bai's sword could enter her small world and be so close to her. Common cultivation theories could not even explain it. His sword was the sword of the human world, with the spirit of the sword Garrett and the mortal world. But after all, it was not the human world itself. In the end, it still could not resist the passage of time. The rust seemed to be covered with white frost. Suddenly, it cracked and then turned into green smoke and disappeared. The sword was destroyed, but the person was still there. His was the real sword. Lu Bai's eyes were unprecedentedly bright, even brighter than when he sensed the surging yellow river when he first entered the awareness state, and even brighter than when he comprehended the sword style of the great river on the cliff by the river. The moment he drew his sword, he knew that he could not win, but he did not give up. As he said, this was already his last interest in the human world. He wanted to see how close he could get to the sky, and whether he could touch the sky, or even use his sword to draw a mark in the sky that only belonged to him. Lu Bai's hand reached into Sang Sang's small world. His hand was very slender and his fingers were slender. It was the hand that was most suitable to hold a sword in the human world. Every time he held the hilt of the sword seemed to be connected to his hand and could not be separated. At this moment he did not hold the sword in his hand. His hand was the sharpest blade. He reached out to Sang Sang's face as if he wanted to pass through the black hair on her cheek. His hand was getting closer and closer to her face. His fingernails gradually turned gray, and his skin gradually lost its elasticity. It became dry and wrinkled, and his sleeves quietly turned into ashes. Lu Bai continued forward. The mark of time moved up his forearm. The skin on his arm began to loosen, and like a dying old man, it was about to lose the luster of life. He continued forward. With a state of disdain for the human world, he fought the most silent and terrifying battle against the merciless time. It seemed that he had walked for tens of thousands of years, or maybe he had really walked for tens of thousands of years. After a long time, Lu Bai finally reached Sang Sang and walked into her small world. So she was only a foot away from him. Regrettably, he was too weak to lift his hand and make the last stab. His white hair draped over his shoulders and withered like the grass covered with frost. The wrinkles on his face were as deep as the bluestone slabs in the east of Lincoln. He had become an old man who was about to die. Sang Sang said, "You have lost." Lu Bai said in an old and tired voice, "You have lost." Sang Sang frowned slightly, not understanding what he meant. "I have left a sword in the human world. I hope that sword will not disappoint the human world." Lu Bai looked at her and said with a smile, "But it has nothing to do with the outcome of this battle." Sang Sang said, "How can you defeat me now?" Lu Bai took a few breaths and slowly raised his withered arm with difficulty. He touched between her eyebrows with the tip of his finger. It was not lethal but more like a touch. In this world there was no such thing as a man conquering the heavens. In fact, it had never happened before in the history that could be seen. However, for countless years, many people had fought for it. They wanted to win and show Haotian the power of the human world. But most of the time they just wanted to prove to themselves and the human world that as long as you were willing to work hard, you could achieve what you wanted. Lu Bai was invincible in the human world. He came to Peach Mountain, entered the divine hall of light and challenged heaven to a battle. He did not think he could win, but he wanted to prove something. At the moment before his death, he finally touched the high and cold sky. He had fulfilled his wish and he saw his own great way. Sang Sang looked at the skinny arm in front of her and remained silent. Lu Bai's body was like a dried-up riverbed, turning into countless pieces of dry soil. He collapsed and fell to the ground with a rustling sound, turning into a pile of dust. No one could be truly immortal and no one could truly live for thousands of years. Even the strongest city wall would turn into sand, and even the strongest river would dry up one day. But no one could deny, not even heaven, that the city wall had once stood tall in the human world, and that the yellow river had once flowed for thousands of miles. In the air in front of Sang Sang, a sword suddenly appeared. The sword was full of ancient qi, but there was no vitality in it. It fell to the ground with a crisp sound. The sword in Lu Bai's hand had already turned into ashes. His body had also turned into ashes. However, the sword was still there. It was as shiny as new and was not damaged at all. It was like the world after the calamity, as if it was foretelling something. Sang Sang looked at the pile of dust and the ancient sword in front of her, and did not say a word. This was the real meaning of her first attack in the human world. It seemed to be an understatement, but it turned the most powerful cultivator in the human world into dust. But her face was a little pale, not knowing whether it was because she was injured or because of other reasons. I haven't slept for more than 30 hours. After updating, I'll go eat. After eating, I'll try to fall asleep. See you tomorrow. Peace. I've been strong before, so I should always be strong. Let's work hard together. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 897. A gust of wind blew in the divine hall of light. The wind was gentle, like a pair of invisible hands, picking up the ashes on the ground and slowly walking out of the divine hall. Sang Sang walked with the ashes and left the balcony. She slowly walked to the cliff yard outside the divine hall and looked down at the snow-like ashes falling from the sky. The front yard of Peach Mountain was in chaos. The offerings for the right to light had disappeared. Dozens of divine talismans were clearly visible on the array of clear light. Ninkei had done a lot. She looked at the figure in front of the altar and could no longer control her anger. So the cool breeze in the mountain suddenly became violent, whistling from the divine hall to all directions of the human world. Autumn in Linqong, the capital of South Jin Kingdom, was not so clear. Instead, people were suffering from the autumn rain. The streets and alleys where the poor lived in the eastern city were even dirtier because of the autumn rain. The dirty water over the broken bricks gave off an unpleasant smell, even worse than the toilet under the curtain. Suddenly, a breeze came from the south and howled through the alleys, sweeping away the unpleasant smell. Yisu was checking the abandoned waterways with a dozen students, making arrangements for the renovation and maintenance after winter. He looked back in the direction of the West Hill Divine Kingdom and sensed something. He looked at the gentle breeze lingering in the streets and said emotionally, "You really saw it?" He said this to his old friend who had left the human world. Before Lu Bai left Linqong, Yisu had hoped that Lu Bai could see the Great Way. Lu Bai saw it, so he was very happy. Autumn in Fuchin River was so charming. The autumn trees by the bank were changing colors, reflecting in the clear water. It was as if the water was dazzling. Junimo and Muyu walked out of the Chui garden and suddenly felt the wind was getting stronger. He walked to the bank and looked at the broken reflections. After a long silence, he said, "I'm going on a long journey." He felt that Lu Bai had left the human world. So did Muyu. But she didn't understand why Junimo would make arrangements for Lu Bai's departure. "Where are you going?" she asked, looking a little uneasy. "I want to go to Shenkong Temple. Since I want to learn Buddhism, I have to go there," Junimo said. Looking at her expression, he continued, "I will only cultivate Buddhism, not become a monk." Muyu asked, "Why did you make such a decision?" Junimo said, "She's too powerful. Junior brother may not be able to control her." Muyu looked at him and asked, "Actually, you just envy Lu Bai?" Junimo said, "Yes, I envy him. But Yisu and I were in the sword he stabbed at Haoyin today, so I'm very grateful to him." In autumn, the wilderness had long been cold. The wind blowing in the desolate wilderness seemed to be filtered by ice and snow. Once it touched the body, it felt cold like needles piercing into the bones. Tang Lu puffed out her chest, but she didn't feel anything. She was still continuing the unfinished conversation with her teacher in the carriage on her shoulder. Even if Lu Bai's sword can make her emotional, What's the point of being emotional? If she's sentimental, junior brother will have a chance. Yu Lian sat in the carriage as if she was sitting on a hill. She looked to the south and slowly raised her eyebrows. There was a lot of information in the wind. Tang also sensed the information and suddenly felt the wind blowing on his chest was a little cold. Yu Lian said, Lu Bai is dead. She's really invincible. It's meaningless for us to go to Peach Mountain. Except for Ning Ke, no one can defeat her. Tang said, I'm just a little worried. Yu Lian said, Tang Xiaotang, Pippi and Ning Ke are all on Peach Mountain. The Divine Hall even asked the House of Red Sleeves to go to Peach Mountain. Do you know what that means? I don't know. There's a girl named Xiao Chao in the House of Red Sleeves. She used to be her best friend in Chang'an. Tang Xiaotang is her best friend in the back of the mountain of the academy. Pippi is very close to her, not to mention Ning Quebec. It means that the people closest to her are all on Peach Mountain now. Then, she gave teacher the will of heaven, so teacher gave her the earthly fate. She invited teacher to Hao Yin's divine kingdom, so teacher left her in the human world. If she wants to go back, she has to cut off her earthly fate. How to cut off her earthly fate? The first thing she has to do is to cut off her earthly fate. She wants to kill Xiaotang and the others? Yes. Then shouldn't we be more worried? How can it be so easy to cut off her earthly fate? Yu Lian said, I think she must be very distressed now. Tang asked, what is the academy's plan? Yu Lian said, the academy has no plan at all. Tang was a little surprised and asked in confusion, no plan? Yes. As I said before, God's plan is better than man's plan. So why bother? We don't need to do anything? Yu Lian said, the academy asked Ning Ke to go to Peach Mountain. Is that enough? Since we can't beat her, then let her do it herself. Anyway, no matter what she does, she can only make the situation what youngest brother wants. Why is that? Because she is youngest brother's natal. Tang was very shocked and did not know what to say. Yu Lian looked at the high sky and said with emotion, teacher took youngest brother as his last disciple. Now that I think about it, it is because of this. Tang frowned and said, but she should be able to predict this. Even God's plan can't predict one's natal. In fact, Yu Lian did not know that the reason why she could not include Ning Ke in her plan was not only because Ning Ke was her natal, but also because Ning Ke did not belong to this world. Tang said with emotion, so not calculating is also a kind of calculation. Our enlightenment doctrine is best at scheming. Since Uncle Lotus, we have calculated everything in the world. But even teacher couldn't predict her, so I can't either. The wind of the wilderness blew her hair. Yu Lian withdrew her gaze and looked in the direction of the West Hill Divine Kingdom in the south. She said, so I waited for her to calculate her death. The devil's doctrine was good at scheming. If Lotus had not had that story with Koharin, the devil's doctrine would have been dominating the human world under his scheming. As the current leader of the devil's doctrine, Yu Lian was naturally very talented in this aspect. Just as Tang said, she did not calculate Hao Yin, which was actually the most incredible kind of calculation. Except for Hao Yin, everything else was in her calculations. Letting Xiong Chumo go at the back of the mountain of the academy last year and ignoring the people from the South Sea were all part of her calculations. As for what would happen in the end, she was not sure. But she was sure that Taoism would continue to decline. The decline of Taoism meant the power of the academy. Tang suddenly said, in fact, sometimes I have been thinking about what the human world would be like if Master Lotus did not have that story and was still alive. Yu Lian said, not to mention Lotus, even if I did not enter the academy, at least half of the human world would be the territory of the Enlightenment doctrine. Tang looked back at her and asked, teacher, do you feel any regret? What regret? As long as youngest brother could win, the entire human world would belong to the academy. Yu Lian opened her arms as if she was going to embrace the entire world. The breeze blew gently and then gradually died down. The peach blossom petals on the front yard of Peach Mountain danced again. The array of clear light trembled and dozens of divine talismans gradually dimmed. Ning Ke knew that Lu Bai was dead. He was not surprised by the outcome of the battle between heaven and man. All human beings who challenged Hao Yin in history ended up on the road of no return. Even though the headmaster was still in the Night Dome, he could not come back either. The academy did not have a plan, but they had been waiting for a change. The change was not Lu Bai's sword that represented the human world, but the subsequent change brought by the sword. All the process was to serve one purpose, to re-establish the natal connection between Ning Ke and her. Only in this way could the human world retain the last chance of winning. Lu Bai's sword went to Peach Mountain. The hierarch had Tianqi. The change that the academy had been waiting for finally came. Her Haoyin's divine power entered his body. It did not mean victory, but he was sure that the connection had been re-established. That was why he was calm. She was furious. The gate of Haoyin's divine kingdom was destroyed. She was left in the human world with no way back. From the moment she woke up, the first thing she did was to completely cut off the connection between her and Ning Quebec. That was why Ning Ke could not feel her presence in Chang'an. However, she did not expect that the Peach Mountain today was like the Yanming Lake several years ago. She had re-established that connection with him. She stood in front of the divine hall of light, but she could feel everything about him at the foot of the mountain. He was sad because of Lu Bai's departure, so she was sad too. He was happy because he could feel her, so she was happy too. She was sad for his sorrow, happy for his happiness, and angry for his anger. She became angrier and angrier. She was the great Haoyin and he was a lowly human being. How could she become his natal? It was the dirtiest blasphemy for her to feel his every emotion. However, anger should not be an emotion that Haoyin should have. It meant that she was becoming more and more human, and that she was being affected by him. So she became angrier and angrier. It was not until now that she realized that Chin Pippi could escape from the Peach Mountain and not be burned to death by her divine flame. It was because of herself. Many years ago, Ning Ke had said something to her. I've mentioned the academy student called Chin Pippi to you? Remember him for me. I owe this guy my life. Remind me to find a way to return it to him at the right time and place. She had always remembered this. That was why she wanted to kill Chin Pippi and cut off her bond with him. However, no matter how she calculated, Chin Pippi would still be alive. No matter how she cut off the connection between her and Ning Ke, the connection had always been there. She was always his natal. This fact had never changed. She wanted to cut off her bond with him, but she could not. Instead, it became more and more chaotic. How could she not be angry? The 3 unconnected chapters are the main plot of this scene. Please participate as soon as possible. The book review competition of the night will end in 4 days. Everyone, please participate as soon as possible. The rewards are very generous. There will be Chidian coins and signed books. I have learned a lot from the participating book reviews. I'm very grateful to everyone. I have figured out some things in these few days which should be helpful. For example, I am ready to give up the plot outline. There will definitely be a period of time where I will not be used to it. I am not in a good state recently, and I am going to go out the day after tomorrow. Recently, I will update a chapter every day. I will report to you. Of course, I will not take any tickets. We will talk about it when I recover. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 898. The divine kingdom was hard to open, and the right to light would fail. These things were all within God's calculations. But she was still angry when they happened. Looking at the figure in front of the altar at the foot of the mountain, thinking of how he had ruined everything and how he had dared to use his divine power to kill his own followers, her hands behind her back began to tremble. Everything in the world was within her calculations except for Ning Quebec. She did not expect that he would not only ruin the right to light, but also make a joke out of himself. She became angrier and angrier, so the wind in the human world became more and more violent. It rolled up the dust on the ground and covered the clear autumn sky. Countless dark clouds floated from the East Sea in the distance, dimming the light in Peach Mountain. Then came the heavy rain. The heavy rain was so violent that the autumn forest and the mountain path were instantly soaked. The peach petals on the ground were smashed into pieces, and the uncoagulated blood was quickly diluted and disappeared. The water on the front yard rose at a speed visible to the naked eye. Dead leaves were floating in the water and broken limbs were faintly visible. The heavy rain blocked people's sight. The whole world seemed to be empty except for the cold and wet rain. The rumbling of the rain sounded like thunder. The power of heaven and earth was attached to the heavy rain and kept washing Peach Mountain, washing away people's bodies and souls. The tens of thousands of followers on the front yard were pale and terrified, kneeling in the rain. The torrential rain continued to fall, and the light above the sacrificial altar was washed away. Then it gradually disappeared without a trace. The dozens of divine talismans that were fighting against the clear light also gradually faded until they disappeared. The hierarch, Qin Yan, and all the other powerhouses in the human world were suppressed to the ground by the rain. They were in a higher state than the ordinary followers and had more sensitive senses. Therefore they could clearly feel the anger of Haoyin in the rain. They were even more frightened, kneeling on the ground with pale faces, and did not even dare to raise their heads. The tens of thousands of followers were washed away by the rain as soon as their blood flowed out of their wounds. They were cold and their lips were blue, but no one dared to avoid it. Thunder and rain were all blessings of God. If there was a center of this terrible storm, then Ning Ke was standing there. He sensed the most powerful Hao Yin's divine power and paid the heaviest price. Dozens of divine talismans had already dissipated. The most terrifying thing was that the Hao Yin's divine power in his body was disappearing faster and faster under the washing of the storm. Rainwater continuously dripped down his pale face. Feeling the divine power in his body disappearing, he was so cold that he couldn't stop shivering. He looked extremely weak, as though he could collapse at any moment. But no matter how fierce the storm was, he did not fall, nor did he kneel. He looked at the Peach Mountain silently in the wind and rain, squinting his eyes through the wind and rain, looking for her who should be there. Thousands of miles away from Peach Mountain, over the boundless sea of the Kingdom of Song, the strong wind rolled up the dark clouds. Between the dark clouds and the sea, the petrel flew proudly like black lightning. Let the storm be more violent. In the front yard of Peach Mountain, tens of thousands of people knelt on the ground in fear. They looked so small in the dark. Only Ning Ke stood there. Even though he looked so lonely, he looked so tall. He was not a brave and arrogant petrel. He never cared about dignity in order to survive. Even though he had knelt before, he didn't want to kneel now. He had already re-established a connection with her. Since you are my natal, then you are my Sang-Sang. You are my wife. We can raise our eyebrows, but how can we kneel down to you? Kill me if you can. F***CK. Today's rain was different from the one after the headmaster left the human world. Since it represented the anger of Hao Yin, it was certainly much more violent. This rain was not as heavy as the one after the headmaster left the human world. But at least it lasted much longer than the common rainstorms in summer. The downpour lasted for half a day before it gradually lightened. The fine drizzle finally felt like a pitter-patter, and the wind in the front yard also became much gentler, bringing with it a sense of wetness that made people feel extremely comfortable. Tens of thousands of followers woke up and found that the storm was no longer raging. Peach Mountain had finally regained its tranquility. Many people had fainted because of the storm, and some had even stopped breathing. Their soaked clothes sent a piercing chill to their bones. They were still frightened and did not dare to speak. The powerful cultivators were even more miserable. The storm was so terrible that it was even more cleansed than the chi of heaven and earth in the mountains. The stronger their senses were, the more their psyche power was damaged. Ning Ke was the most miserable one. At this moment, the Hao Yin's divine power in his body had disappeared. The psyche power in his sense of perception was severely damaged. His black hair was dripping down his shoulders. His pale face was haggard and his eyes were no longer bright. They were so dim that it seemed like they were about to lose all their luster. The storm stopped and the sky became clear again. Suddenly, a rainbow appeared from the divine hall of light on the peak of Peach Mountain and fell into the distance. Judging from the direction, the rainbow should land somewhere in the South Jin Kingdom. Looking at this beautiful scene, people on the front yard of Peach Mountain seemed to have forgotten the cold on their bodies. Their feet were still soaked in the cold rain. Recalling the power of heaven and earth, they were filled with awe and worship again. It was already dusk. The shadow of the dark night could be vaguely seen in the lower part of the sky. Some people looked away from the disappearing rainbow and looked at Ning Ke in front of the altar. The storm that lasted for half a day had washed away the anger and dust in the world. It had washed away the Hao Yin's divine power in Ning Ke's body and the divine talisman. But it could not wash away the past. The hierarch looked at Ning Ke and slowly raised his right hand. He gave the order to attack. No one could understand why Ning Ke did not take the chance to escape when the storm stopped. He had no more Hao Yin's divine power in his body. What else could he do other than escape? Ning Ke looked at the people around him, including Qin Yin, the national master of the Golden Tribe, and Zhao Nanhai. He put the iron bow on his shoulder and tightened his grip on the handle of the iron cutlass. Previously, because of the Grand Tianqi, he was invincible in the human world with the help of Hao Yin's divine power. These people were no match for him at all. However, the situation had taken a decisive turn now. Under the siege of these experts, he could not even hold on for a few breaths. If he drew his bow and waited to shoot, he might be able to intimidate these people. At least he could try to open a path for himself. But the problem was that he did not have enough iron arrows. Most importantly, he had never thought of opening a path to escape. He had never thought of leaving Peach Mountain. Looking at the powerful enemies around him, Ning Ke did not show any fear. He looked at Crown Prince Chongming and the other monarchs of the smaller countries and said, I will not kill you today, not because of the rule that cultivators should not kill ordinary people, but because I think you deserve to die in the hands of the Tang soldiers." No one could understand why he could be so calm and confident in such a desperate situation. What was he thinking? The hierarch shouted, "Do you think you can escape from Peach Mountain?" Ning Ke looked at the horrible wound on his shoulder and said sarcastically, "At least you can't stop me." The hierarch calmed down and said coldly, "In front of you is a dead end." Ning Ke said, "No way out is a dead end." The hierarch asked, "Where is your way out?" At this time, the national master of the Golden Tribe and the others had blocked all the paths in the front yard. No matter who they were, Ning Ke would not be able to defeat them under normal circumstances. Logically speaking, he had no way out, so there was no way out. But everyone, including the hierarch, had forgotten that he only needed to step back to set foot on a path. The path to Peach Mountain. Hao Yin was on Peach Mountain. The hierarch and everyone else thought that Ning Ke would not choose to go up the mountain because it would be suicidal. But he made a choice that surprised everyone. He turned around and ran up Peach Mountain. It happened so suddenly that the West Hill Divine Palace's reaction was a little slow. The hierarch roared and countless sharp flying swords broke through the air and shot toward Ning Ke on the stone steps. The national master of the Golden Tribe raised the cracked wooden tripod in his hand. Zhao Nanhai's palm shone brightly. Qin Yin sat cross-legged in the rain and chanted a Buddhist hymn. A handprint appeared in the air and then fell down. Ning Ke knew that he could not stop it. Even if Third Sister were here, facing the sword array of the divine halls of West Hill and the joint attack of the three peerless powerhouses, she could only choose to retreat. So he did not turn around to resist, nor did he choose to dodge. He stepped on the stone steps and increased his speed to a terrifying level. He continued to rush toward the peak. A series of muffled explosions rang out. The psyche power of the national master of the Golden Tribe kept bombarding his sense of perception. Hao Yin's divine flame in Zhao Nanhai's palm hit his back. Qin Yin's Akalanatha seal landed heavily on his body. Dozens of flying swords cut his clothes into pieces. Ning Ke spat out a mouthful of blood. His face turned even paler and he almost fell on the stone steps. If it were not for the fact that his great spirit was almost at the highest level and his body was almost unbelievably strong, the first wave of attack would have crushed him into pieces. Even if he survived, he would still be seriously injured. Ning Ke used his strong willpower to restrain his sense of perception, which had almost dissipated because of the pain. He stomped heavily on the ground with his right foot, breaking several stone steps, and turned into a shadow as he continued to move forward. Not only did he not fall, he even sped up. In just a few breaths, he had already broken hundreds of stone steps and was far away from the attack range of the powerhouses in the front yard of Peach Mountain. He became a faint shadow on the mountain path. When the divine priests and deacons of the divine halls of West Hill, Zhao Nanhai and the others were about to continue their pursuit, the hierarch suddenly reached out his hand with a complicated expression and signaled for them to stop. Because of the right to light, everyone from the divine halls of West Hill was gathered around the altar in the front yard. At this moment there was no one on Peach Mountain. Except for the sound of flowing water beside the stone steps, it was eerily quiet. The silence was suddenly broken by the sound of footsteps. Ning Ke turned into a shadow on the stone steps and ran toward the peak at an unimaginable speed, leaving behind a trail of blood and broken stone steps. In that moment he had been seriously injured. His sense of perception was shaken and every step he took brought more pain. His ribs were cracked by Qin Yin's giant handprint and the cracks seemed to deepen with every step he took. No one knew when his ribs would break. If only the big black umbrella was here. Who could hurt him then? Ning Ke suddenly felt a lot of nostalgia. Thinking that he would see the big black umbrella soon, he became happy again. There was no one on the quiet Peach Mountain. No one was chasing him down the stone steps. He kept running alone. He did not feel lonely or nervous. He was going to see her. How could he feel lonely and nervous? The more he ran, the happier he was. Even the cold autumn wind after the rain could not cut off his smile. The two arrays of clear light were torn apart by his iron cutlass and divine talisman. He came to the foot of the divine hall and stood on the cliff yard. The autumn sky was so clean after the rain. The view from the top of the mountain was even wider. He could see the sun setting in the west and even the yellow river flowing into the sea in the extreme south. Then he looked at the divine hall and the straight stone steps on the peak. He thought to himself, if I go up, will you still hide 1,000 miles away? It took me so long to write this chapter. It seems that I have reached an incredible state where I don't know whether I will live or die. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 899. The air was clear after the rain. Even though it was late at night, people could still see far away. Tens of thousands of believers on the front yard of Peach Mountain looked at the figure on the mountain path with mixed feelings. This scene was very similar to the scene when Ning Kai climbed the back mountain of the academy many years ago. The dark night sky was like a piece of ink paper, suspended on the flat ground. There were dozens of peaks in it, giving people a feeling that if it were not for these peaks, the night sky would fall on the earth. The night sky above the divine halls of West Hill was a bit special today. The sky was full of stars, but there was no trace of the moon. The silver starlight sprinkled on the foothills, changing the color of Peach Mountain. Ning Kai's eyes crossed the silver mountain path and fell on the divine hall of light. Then he began to tidy up his wet clothes, tied up his wet hair, put away his bow and knife, and wiped the rain off his face. He moved very slowly and looked very serious. He didn't go up the stairs until he was sure that there was nothing wrong with his clothes and manners. Since he was here to keep the appointment, he naturally had to show respect. It was already deep into the night. The thin crescent moon was hidden behind the dark clouds and was completely untraceable. The numerous stars on the dark curtain of the night seemed very bright. There were 7 brightest stars in the night sky, known as guiding stars. They were the most reliable guiding lights for fishermen sailing on the sea. They were so bright that it made people dizzy. There were 700 stone steps between the cliff yard and the divine hall of light on the peak. Ning Kai seemed to be walking slowly, but in fact he walked hundreds of steps with each step as if he was riding the wind. As soon as his foot left the cliff plateau and landed on the first foothold, he took a step forward. Among the 7 bright guiding stars in the night sky, the northernmost star, Li Tian star, suddenly dimmed. Ning Kai continued to take the second step, and the second of the 7 guiding stars also dimmed. With every step he took, one of the 7 guiding stars in the night sky dimmed, as if the everlasting starlight was absorbed into his body by his footsteps. Not all of the tens of thousands of people on the front plane could see him walking on the mountain path, but all of them saw the 7 guiding stars in the night sky dim one after another. Shocked shouts and terrified prayers suddenly rang out. The hierarch and the others looked at the strange changes of the stars, and their expressions became even more solemn. The sky was full of stars. There were several divine halls on Peach Mountain, but there was only one in Ning Kai's eyes. The building material of the divine hall of light was very unusual. It was not gold, jade, or stone, but it was naturally precious. Now that it was covered by the starlight, it looked even more sacred. Standing in front of the divine hall of light, Ning Kai looked like an inconspicuous ant. He looked at the divine hall in front of him and fell silent. Extremely complicated emotions welled up in his heart. There was some fear, some excitement, some yearning, but he also wanted to escape. He had risked his life to leave Chang'an, come to the West Hill Divine Kingdom, and sneak into the Peach Mountain just to come to the Divine Hall of Light and see her. He had been calm throughout the entire process. However, when he was about to meet her in the Divine Hall of Light, he could no longer control his emotions. No matter how hard he tried to convince himself that she was Sang Sang in the Divine Hall, that she was the dark and skinny girl he raised, and that blood was thicker than water, she was in fact Haotian. There was a saying called the difference between heaven and earth, which was used to describe the distance between two people. There was also a saying called the distance between heaven and man, which was used to describe the fact that they could never touch each other. He was a mortal and she was Haotian. The distance between them was like the distance between heaven and earth. They were separated by a high wall that connected heaven and earth. The distance between heaven and earth was, in fact, eternal. Ning Kai's emotions had never been so complicated, and he had never been so afraid. If he wanted to find a similar experience in his past life, it was actually related to her. That time, Sang Sang ran away from home. He sat in the old brush pen shop and waited silently. Then he searched everywhere in Chang'an. He stayed silent in the scholar's mansion and cursed the heavens and earth by the Yanming Lake. It seemed that nothing had changed. She still ran away from home and he still had to find her and bring her home. He was worried that he could not bring her home, so he was afraid. Ning Kai suddenly became extremely angry. He did not know if it was because of fear or because she was disobedient like last time. His voice trembled with anger. Is it fun to run away from home? He looked at the quiet depths of the Divine Hall of Light and said, I thought you were young and insensible the first time. What about now? You are already over 20 years old and you are still insensible? Do you know how dirty the old brush pen shop is now? The dust on the table is more than the dust in the stove. Shouldn't you be doing all these things? What are you doing? You are married, so you should wash the dishes, sweep the floor, and wipe the table. But you can't stop and want to play everywhere. You are not home all day. How can there be so many fun things? Look at this shabby divine hall. It is as cold as a stone tomb. It is not as lively as Lin 47th Street. I don't believe that the Chinjinji cosmetics store here is better than the one in Chang'an. There was no sound from the divine hall of light. Ning Ke became more and more annoyed and said, "Say something. Say something. Why don't you dare to speak? Are you feeling guilty? Have you really made up your mind to separate from me? Give me the arrows and the horse carriage and leave the black umbrella and that silly thing. You have clearly divided the property, but have you asked for my permission? Okay, let's not talk about whether I have agreed or not. Let's talk about the separation. Since we are going to separate, we should do it thoroughly. I buried half of the banknotes in the old brush pen shop in your grave. I filled in the title deed of the Yenming Lake Manor with your name. I gave the shares of the gambling house to the Scholar Mansion." His mood suddenly became a little gloomy, and he said in a low voice, "Actually, I never thought of separating from you. The disposal of the property was counted as an inheritance. Since you are still alive, the disposal is naturally invalid. How about you return the things you took and we will pretend that nothing happened?" There was still no sound from the divine hall of light. "Give me back Dahe, give me back the big black umbrella and give yourself back to me." Ning Ke said, "I believe that even if you have forgotten many things, at least you have not forgotten these things. Otherwise, you would not have asked the drunkard to send the arrows and the horse carriage to Chang'an." The divine hall was still quiet and no one answered. "Now I finally understand why you want the West Hill Divine Palace to hold this right to light. It is because you want to kill Pippi but you can't. Because I told you that we owe our lives to him." Ning Ke suddenly became calm and walked into the divine hall. He said, "Even without this Tianqi, the relationship between us has always been there. You have blocked my perception but it still exists. Just like your face is still black even if you put 3 layers of powder on it. Because it is born, it is destined." The quiet divine hall of light echoed with the sound of his footsteps and his calm and firm voice. "You are Haotian and also Yama. So the relationship between us is something that you have decided. Since that is the case, how can you unilaterally cut us off? I really can't take it anymore. 2,000 today, 1,000 short. I will make it up within this month, including the 3,000 chapters that I didn't update on the 5th of the month. In the next few days, I will probably gather the rest of the holidays together and report to you tomorrow. I can't take it anymore." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 900. I said yesterday that I was going to take a vacation. The original plan was to write another chapter today and take a Saturday off tomorrow. Then I would take the next 3 weekends, including the one on Children's Day. That would be a total of 4 days. So I squinted my eyes and tried to continue writing the story. Then I found that I had written a pile of sh*t. Just when I felt that I had written a pile of sh*t, I finally saw Tsunghai's review in the book review section. I read it carefully and kept silent for a long time. Because his praise made me confused, I gave up on that pile of sh*t. I decided to take a break from now on. I didn't care about the reason, I just wanted to have a good rest for a few days. I had to clarify the main topic first. Otherwise, I would end up in such a situation. I wrote a lot of sh*t because I was lazy and didn't want to write. Yes, I will take 7 days off. I will go back to Hubei. I won't do anything. I just want to use these 7 days to have a good time. I don't want to think about anything else. Before you get upset, let me add a few words. After 7 days, Jiang Yi will no longer take a weekend off. In fact, it is a vacation. If you are willing to continue reading, there are more because I want to talk to you. I talked to Yun Kai the day before yesterday. He and I both gave Jiang Yi a similar score. I gave it 7.8, which ranked second among all the stories I had written. We both thought it was good. However, I wasn't satisfied. This was because I had written more than an 8 out of 10. The main reason I gave Jiang Yi 7.8 out of 10 was because I hadn't finished the book yet. There was still 1.5 volumes of content and several 100,000 words. If I could write better in the later chapters, I was confident that I could get more than an 8 out of 10. I was ambitious about Jiang Yi. I reported to everyone when I started writing the book 2 years ago that I wanted this book to be good. The result was good, which proved that my writing was good. But ambition was like weeds. It was hidden, but it didn't mean it didn't exist. Besides writing good, I also wanted to write well. Just like what Songhai said in the book review, the Academy said that life should be meaningful, which in fact means that I said that books should be well written. If there is some meaningful material, then it is the so-called good writing. My problem now is that I am in a very confused stage. Not to mention the latter, it has become very difficult to achieve the former, and I am seriously lacking in confidence. As for why I have this feeling, it has nothing to do with anything else. It is purely because I am a little tired from writing, and my ability to conceive the plot has been severely tested. This was truly a painful matter. Cloud knew that I had been living a chaotic life over the past few days, and that I was incredibly worried. Some of my friends would think that this was nothing more than my latest excuse for slacking off and taking time off. I deserve to be teased or scolded. Alright then, I was probably one of those legendary bitches who couldn't sleep and would sit in front of the computer. Actually, I was still playing games and procrastinating. I wasn't writing because I couldn't write, and I wasn't thinking because I couldn't think of anything. Why was it that what was written and then deleted was bullshit? Because I haven't slept for more than 30 hours. Why haven't I slept? Because they were playing. Why were they playing? Because he couldn't sleep. Why couldn't he sleep? Because he would start thinking of plots while lying on the bed. Just like what I told everyone a few days ago, I still couldn't think of any good plots. As a professional writer, of course, I had to have basic professional ethics. Compared to other writers, I was already lazy enough and wrote slowly enough. I even had to take a day off every week. It seemed like it should be easy, but in reality, thinking about plots continuously for a long period of time had accumulated to the point that it was annoying and tiring. Other things could be solved easily, but if I couldn't think of a good enough plot, there was really no solution to this because it was a problem with my brain. I asked Lin Hai and my other friends for advice. They said that it was because I had too high expectations for myself. I was very gratified when I heard that. I thought to myself that I still had my literary pretentiousness, but I also felt very embarrassed. Because we were all my closest friends, of course I had to say nice things. But if I put it in another way, it might not sound so nice. Maybe it was just like what some of my friends said, that I had a problem with my brain. I had been writing for so many years, but I had always been scolded and ridiculed for having a hipster disease. I had said before that if hipsterism was really a disease, I wouldn't treat it anyway. After all these years of writing, I had been quite popular, hadn't I? But it was really tiring. I had said before that updating was tiring and writing was tiring. In fact, when I looked back at all these years, I had to say without fear of being scolded that thinking about the plots of these novels was the most tiring thing. Perhaps it was as I had said many times in interviews in the past. I didn't need inspiration, but I really needed a good mental state. My mental state was really bad for the past 10 days. Now that I thought about it, if we were talking about the mental state of writing plots, it was still during Suzaku. Was it because I was single at that time? Was it because I didn't have anything to worry about? Or was it because when he couldn't write anything back then, he just stopped writing? He didn't have to do what he was doing now, desperately struggling to write a satisfactory chapter, but accumulating the pressure until the next day, until he couldn't bear it anymore. I remembered the first time I went to the Northeast to meet the leader in September that year. I immediately applied for a month's leave. I didn't feel any psychological pressure when I applied, and the readers happily wished me a safe journey. Of course, the situation now was definitely different from back then. Professional writers had to be able to withstand this kind of pressure. The readers spent money to read, tipped, and voted, so why shouldn't I work hard? But there were really many kinds of hard work. My current terrible mental state was really the result of hard work. I had to think of a way to change it. I had to make hard work produce results. Only then would I be able to write well for the next 20 years. Only then would I be able to continue writing for you for the next 20 years. Starting from the year of Qingyu in these 6 years, I've applied for all kinds of leave, sick leave, personal leave, annual leave that I couldn't write out, but I've never applied for leave without a reason. I really couldn't find a reason for this 7 days of leave. I just needed a period of time to relax or even to party. If I can't drink beer, then I'll drink less white wine. Taking a break doesn't always have a good result. It might even make the author lazier or even collapse. But I'm not worried about this, and you don't need to worry either. Because the purpose of my rest is to write this story above an 8 out of 10. I want all the stories I write in the future to be above an 8 out of 10. I can definitely do it. To achieve this is indeed a difficult task. But I have confidence because I know that deep down, I'm a ruthless person. I'm a ruthless person to myself. More than 10 years ago in Chengdu, I went to the stadium with my university classmates to buy tickets for a football match. I wanted to resell the tickets to make some money. At that time it was really overcrowded. We lined up for an entire night, and in the wee hours of the morning the line was broken. The iron railings were knocked down and some people fell to the ground bleeding. Some people were squeezed until their intestines were cut into pieces. In the end, all the classmates around me were squeezed out, and only I stood at the very end with a dull expression. I bought the tickets and in the end I earned $4. This was a famous joke in our university, and it was also a good joke that has continuously provided me with moral support. I know to what extent I can do it. I wrote 2,500 words for this leave of absence. I said this not to express my sincerity, but to say that with my current mental state, I'm afraid that I won't be able to write good content. But if I don't care about the quality, it really isn't difficult to write a 3,000-word chapter of Approaching Night. Of course, this explanation might not have any meaning. My friends who want to scold me will still scold me. But for those of you who have been supporting and tolerating me all these years, I want to explain it to you. I once wrote this sentence in one of my monthly votes. You can choose not to vote, but I can't not vote. What I said was powerful and resonant, and it caused countless echoes in the pugilistic world. In fact, this chapter has the same meaning. Perhaps you don't want to hear my reason, but I have to seriously report it to you. No matter what, I thank everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 901. Ning Ke walked to the depths of the divine hall and saw the figure on the balcony. He was a little shocked because the figure was very tall, even taller than an ordinary man. The woman on the balcony was very fat, beyond the range of plump, and could only be described as fat. She was wearing a very thin flowery green dress. The autumn wind blew gently at the bottom of the cliff, but it didn't move at all. This was because the fabric of the dress was extremely tight against her plump body, tightly sticking to her body, and the lines of her dress were exaggerated. Ning Ke had imagined the scene of reuniting with Sang Sang many times, but he never expected that when they met again, the dark and thin girl had disappeared, and the tall and fat woman appeared in front of him. He remembered the horse carriage he saw when he bought sweet potatoes in the small town, and the tall and fat girl in the horse carriage. He remembered that he had once said that she was like a fat pig, and then he realized that they had already met. At that time he did not know her, but she must have known everything. Thinking of this, he felt that his confidence was gradually dissipating, and the academy's plan seemed to be becoming ridiculous. He looked at her back and was silent for a long time. This woman did not look like Sang Sang at all. She was a completely different person from the Sang Sang in his memories, but he knew that she was Sang Sang. It was not because of that mysterious feeling, but because of his certain perception. The barrier between them had disappeared, so he naturally knew that she was Sang Sang. The woman on the balcony was obviously Sang Sang, but she did not look like Sang Sang. She was not the thin and dark Sang Sang but the white and fat Sang Sang. Ning Ke suddenly felt sad because he knew that he would probably never see the thin and dark Sang Sang again. Sang Sang stood on the balcony, looking at the autumn night from the precipice, with her hands behind her back. Her green sleeves were like the sea, and her figure was tall and straight like a peak. But he felt so lonely. "Come home with me." Ning Ke looked at her back and said in a very natural tone, not as excited as before outside the divine hall. He was like a man who saw his playful little wife by the lake. Sang Sang did not turn around. She still kept her hands behind her back and said nothing. The starlight from the night sky shone on the balcony, sprinkled on her broad shoulders and then spread like ink. It was quiet in the divine hall. The night wind blew in from the terrace, bypassing the broken 10,000-year-old lamp and lifting an old cloth, revealing a golden brick and a big black umbrella. Looking at that place, Ning Ke walked to the balcony after a moment of silence. He came up behind her and put his hand on her shoulder, as if to brush the starlight away from her. The night breeze was gentle. His fingertips fell on her shoulders and then fell again. The tip of his finger had been sliced off. Blood gradually flowed out and condensed into an extremely neat circle. It looked like a dark red dot, as beautiful as a cinnabar mole on a beauty's body. There were countless lines invisible to the naked eye on the balcony, dividing the space into two completely different worlds, Sang Sang's world and the human world. Sang Sang's world was composed of the most basic laws, including the laws of space. As long as she didn't allow it, no one could enter her world. Her world and the human world were extremely far apart. Even if she came to the human world, it was still the same. She was clearly standing in front of Ning Ke, but it seemed that she was far away. Ning Ke stood so close to her, but they were so far apart. Looking at the dark red blood at the tip of his finger, Ning Ke was silent for a long time. Then he smiled lightly and sarcastically. He said, "We are indeed worlds apart." He raised his head to look at her tall back, at her plump waist and buttocks, and said, "You've gotten fatter and taller. You've changed. I think you've forgotten a lot of things." Sang Sang still did not speak or turn around. She held her hands behind her back and looked at the mountains under the night sky. "I can't forget those things. That year in Hebei province, starving people killed each other, and their parents traded their children for food. Although I survived, I had already become one of them. If I hadn't dug you out from the pile of corpses, I don't know how I would have lived alone. So not only did I save you, in a sense you also saved me. You allowed me to live more like a human. You allowed me to find a bright reason to live when I committed all kinds of crimes in Min Mountain and the wilderness. Yes, for me at that time, you were the only light on my back. You were even the only reason for me to live in this world." Looking at her back and her hands behind her back, Ning Ke suddenly wanted to hold her hands. Just like many years ago when she was scared by the wolves in Min Mountain and cried, he held her in his arms, held her hands tightly, and told her stories all night long. Now her hands were not so small, but he still wanted to hold them. This desire was so strong that his voice trembled slightly. "I don't know if you have ever thought about what the meaning of life is. You are an eternal and objective existence, while human beings are just passers-by on the journey of time. Our lives are very short and will inevitably end one day. It is easy to fall into the path of nothingness. In the end, the reason that can make us resolutely go through every day is nothing more than something that appears to be more powerful in the spirit, such as emotions. If you carefully analyze these things, you will often find that all of these things are based on memories. The more memories you have, the stronger and longer the emotions you have. I don't want to recall those things with you now. But you know very well that we have memories that neither of us can compare. So you can't leave me and I can't leave you. As I have said before, you are my natal and you are my life. So I came to find you and I want to take you away." After saying this, he reached out to her shoulder again, wanting to brush away the lonely starlight, wanting to pull her back from that lonely world, back to the human world, back to his side. There were countless crisp cracking sounds on the balcony, and his sleeves were instantly torn into countless pieces. The pure Great Spirit covering his arm only lasted for a very short time before it was cut into pieces by the lines in the space. Countless fine lines of blood appeared on his arm, and it looked like it was about to be cut off. Suddenly, the space rules that divided the world into two sides disappeared, and the horrible blood lines on his arm did not continue to go deeper. Because Sang Sang opened her own world. Sang Sang slowly turned around and looked at him quietly. There was no emotion in her eyes, only calmness. Ning Ke had not yet recovered from the shock of her opening her world. Looking at her eyes, he became more and more shocked and speechless, because he had never seen her look like this. Sang Sang reached out and held his frozen hand in front of him. He felt that her hand was very soft and very warm, just like the lake water, which could contain everything. No, it was not a hand, but a gentle universe, which made him a little fascinated. She was his natal, so she could feel what he was thinking, and when they held hands he could also see her consciousness and her thoughts. Hao Yin's consciousness was so vast as the sea of stars, that ordinary people could not bear. Even if Sang Sang tried to control it at this time, Ning Ke's sense of perception still set off shocking waves. Blood began to ooze from the corners of his eyes, but his eyes were still bright, because he saw many memories, many of her memories in the stormy waves. He saw the mulberry trees stripped of their bark in Hebei province, the bleeding lambs in Min Mountain, the roast chicken and wine in the city of Wei, the old brush pen shop in Chang'an, the cosmetics in Shinjinji Cosmetics store, the summer rain and the notes under the bed, and the night by the snow sea. It turned out that she did not forget anything. She remembered all these things even more clearly than he did. Suddenly Ning Ke's eyes were no longer bright but a little dim. Then he began to get angry because he understood a cold fact. She was Hao Yin, and the scenes in these memories were originally arranged by her. These memories were just derivatives of her asking the headmaster to ascend to heaven. She and the headmaster had known each other for thousands of years, and neither of them could do anything to the other. She used heaven's calculation to construct a natural situation, descended to the human world, and finally succeeded in forcing the headmaster to ascend to heaven. The memories between her and Ning Ke were part of this heaven's calculation, but they were neither the cause nor the goal. It could even be said that they were just means. Ning Ke stared at her eyes, at the eternal calmness that did not belong to human beings, and slowly clenched his left fist. Because of his strength, the bloodlines on his right arm burst open again. In fact, he had always understood that the memories he cherished were just her calculations. The two most crucial points of the headmaster's departure from the human world were naturally to accept him as a disciple, and Sang Sang being exposed as the daughter of Yama. He carried Sang Sang on his back and fled all over the world. Everything was just heaven's calculation, but he did not want to think about these things because he was not reconciled to it. He always felt that she was still Sang Sang, until this moment, when they held hands and their minds were connected. Everything was exposed, so he felt very painful. Everything is heaven's calculation, so the memories are naturally fake. Ning Ke thought silently, and then he understood everything in his consciousness. Those memories could be real, because Sang Sang had not yet woken up at that time, and she was still his Sang Sang. But when Sang Sang woke up, those memories became means. I did not calculate everything because you are not from this world, so I stayed in the human world. The connection between us can never be cut off. Sang Sang said, so you have to surrender to me? Ning Ke had never hidden anything from her, including his biggest secret. Last year, when he was wandering on the sea with the headmaster, he did not hide their conversation from her. She knew that he was not from the Haotian world, so she decided to show her generosity and kindness. Ning Ke stared into her eyes and asked, I am not your people, why should I surrender to you? Sang Sang said, I will grant you eternity. Ning Ke asked, what is eternity? Can it be eaten? Or can it make my bed and quilt? I am back. I only went online once in 7 days and I found that it feels good and my mind is much clearer. If you want to contact me, you can call me, email me, or leave a message. Wait for me to reply when I get home. 7 days seems long, but in fact it is very short. Something happened and I cursed my mother on Weibo. In addition, Yun Kai will not care about the book review section for the time being. In fact, she told me many days ago that it is really hard and I sincerely thank you for your hard work. The other managers have also worked hard. Once again, thank you for your tolerance. I'm not a professional author, but you are the best readers, I'm sure of that. Because I will be in Hubei this month, I have to go out, so I try my best to write this paragraph well. I dare not say how much, but I will write more when I get home in June. Thank you again, sincerely. In addition, I like the last sentence of this chapter very much. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 902. Every death in the world is a reunion after a long parting. Outside Chang'an, the drunkard once said this to Ning Quebec. Ning Ke never understood what it meant. It was not until this moment that he realized it was an invitation. Sang Sang asked the drunkard to tell him this. According to the doctrine of Haotian, the death of a believer was to return to the kingdom of light and the embrace of Haotian. If he was willing to surrender to her, he could be with her forever after death. What was surrender? It was Ning Ke removing the natal connection with Sang Sang. Although she was Haotian, she had to obey the rules of the world of Haotian. When she found that she could not cut off this mortal bond, she could only hope that Ning Ke could do it himself. Haotian would not deceive the world. When the world chased after the daughter of Yama, it was not her who deceived the world. It was the mistake of the people who were blinded by dust. She said that she would grant Ning Ke eternity, so there must be eternity. Even if Ning Ke's answer was so rude, she was not going to change her mind. If the hierarch knew that Haotian would grant such a great gift, he would be mad with jealousy. But Ning Ke's mood did not change. He stared into her eyes and continued, God does not negotiate with the world. Why do you negotiate with me? Do you like me? Or are you afraid of me? You are not one of my people, so I can forgive the sins you have committed. I hate those memories, but in them you have loved me enough, so I give you the gift of God. Sang Sang's face was emotionless and frighteningly calm. That year in the Victory House in Chang'an, you hid behind me and drank the 9-river double-distilled wine. You were so happy that you forgot Longqing. Longqing asked me to give you to him. I said he was very beautiful. Ning Ke looked at her ordinary face and said, you have become paler and fatter, but you are not beautiful. But I really want to say the same words to you now. Since you were born so beautiful, then don't think about it so much. In my past life I didn't respect you, but I doted on you. Why should I submit to you? Sang Sang said, in my memory, you are a person who is afraid of death. Ning Ke said, then you should remember that I am afraid of some things more than life and death. Sang Sang asked, what things? Ning Ke replied, for example, you and my relationship. Sang Sang said, so even if you will be killed by me, you will not submit to me? Ning Ke said, in fact, I don't think you will kill me. That is why I have the courage to stand here. Sang Sang frowned slightly and said, Why wouldn't I kill you? Because you are my origin. So? If I die you will die too. Hao Yin will never die, but it will be washed clean. Will the new Hao Yin still be the original Hao Yin? You have left Hao Yin's divine kingdom, but you already exist. You have the memories of the human world. You have the dust and breath on your body. You already have your own consciousness. You are life, and as long as you are alive you do not want to die. You do not want to lose your current self. Ning Ke looked into her eyes and said, We can only live or die together. That's why you don't dare to go to Chang'an and kill me. You don't even dare to see me. Sang Sang said, Why not be with me for eternity? Ning Ke said, That's nothing. What I want to be together is not this kind of together. What I want is for two independent existences to be together. We can be one but we can't be one. Because then there will be no you and me. We won't be able to feel you and me. It will be meaningless. Sang Sang said, The Academy has always believed in meaning. Ning Ke said, Wouldn't it be better if we could find some meaning? Sang Sang said, What I gave to the drunkard and the butcher can also be given to you. It must be an objective and independent eternity in the divine kingdom. You don't have to worry about losing your own consciousness. Ning Ke said, But I still have to submit to you. Sang Sang said, All lives must submit to me. Ning Ke said, I don't accept it. Sang Sang asked, Why? Ning Ke said, Because you are my woman. Sang Sang did not understand what he meant. Ning Ke looked at her and said, Since you are my woman, only you can submit to me. You should listen to me in bed or at the dining table. Sang Sang frowned slightly and said, How can you do that? Ning Ke looked at her and said calmly, Just like that night by the hot sea. If you don't submit, I will *CK you until you do. Sang Sang's expression did not change. But in the depths of her bright willowy eyes, there were billions of stars being destroyed. Her hand was no longer a gentle universe, but an angry universe. Ning Ke felt a strong divine power falling on him. Countless mountains were pressing on his shoulders. His knees began to creak as if they would break at any time. He could clearly feel how cold and authoritative her hand was while he was holding it. His eyes and ears began to bleed, and the blood dripped on the terrace in front of him. His face was covered with blood, but it still could not hide the happy smile on his face. There is something that I have never understood all these years. You are so good, so hardworking, but so many people never like you. They like Shan Shan Ilan and even that idiot Liu, but they don't like you. I didn't understand until now. It's because people can't feel human feelings and warmth from you, because you are indeed not human. He stared at Sang Sang and said, You let my teacher go to the sky and my teacher let you fall to the ground. You are a god high above, but I want to turn you into a human. If this is a war, then it is a war between me and my disciple and you. I can clearly feel the anger and hatred in your body. Those are all emotions that only human beings have. I think this is the dawn of victory. As soon as he finished speaking, he took a step forward and was about to hold her in his arms. He cast a divine talisman of Yin with his left hand to cover his body. At the same time he began to summon his natal in his consciousness. He began to summon Sang Sang. On the cliff by the snow lake that year he sang a song for Sang Sang. Sang Sang understood the song and the call and invitation in the song. It was different from the invitation that she conveyed through the drunkard. That invitation was so close that it meant absolute obedience. Even the shadow of death and the threat of Yama could not tear it apart. Any life with self-consciousness would instinctively resist such an absolute one-sided connection. Even if they finally accepted it, it would take them a long time to struggle. But Sang Sang, who was standing on the cliff at that time, did not hesitate or struggle. She agreed to the invitation because she was not Hao Yin at that time. She was his little handmaiden. Once the natal connection was established, it was indestructible. Even Hao Yin could not cut it off by himself. So Sang Sang's face instantly turned pale and her thin eyebrows furrowed. This was the most crucial part of the Academy's plan. To be precise, it was a continuation of the headmaster's trip to the human world with Sang Sang last year. It was also the reason why Ning Ke dared to leave Chang and then come to the divine halls of West Hill. No natal item could refuse a cultivator's order. However, what happened next was beyond Ning Ke's expectation. Sang Sang's face turned pale and her green sleeves trembled for a few seconds. But nothing else changed. She did not pass out or fall as he had requested, nor did he hold her in his arms. Because she was Hao Yin, she was not an ordinary natal item. She was not a sword or a talisman, nor was she a prayer bead. She was an objective rule. Although she had to obey the rules of her natal life, she was an almost infinite existence. Therefore, if she wanted to realize the rules related to her, she would need more power. For example, if a boulder fell from a cliff, it would also obey the rules. However, when pushing the boulder, unimaginable power was needed. Ning Ke was now one of the few powerhouses in the human world. His psyche power was strong, but when he wanted to directly control Hao Yan with his consciousness, it still seemed a little small and ridiculous. Sang Sang did not laugh. She looked at Ning Ke expressionlessly. Ning Ke found that the ocean of qi and mountain of snow in his body were instantly locked by the rules that he could not understand. Then they gradually collapsed. The great spirit dissipated with the night wind. He lost all his power. Sang Sang slowly let go of his hand. Ning Ke's hand was no longer melted by the gentle water. His body suddenly became light and his feet gradually left the ground. His body was blown by the night wind and floated backward uncontrollably. He floated to the top of the divine hall of light like a dandelion and was bound by dozens of invisible forces. He looked like a poor little reptile in the middle of a spider's web. No matter how he struggled, he could not get rid of those threads. Because those threads were rules. Ning Ke did not struggle. He looked at the blood slowly dripping from his body and remained silent. Sang Sang walked down with her hands behind her back and looked at him quietly. There was no emotion on her face or in her eyes. She was looking up, but it felt like she was overlooking the whole world. She just looked at him and he was defeated. Because she was Hao Yan. But Ning Ke knew that he had not completely failed because he was not dead. She was still his natal item. Ning Ke began to think about how to continue this battle. There was no precedent for this battle. Whether it was the battles of youngest uncle, the headmaster of academy, or Lu Bai, they were all different. He had no one to learn from. His train of thought was interrupted by a sudden sharp pain. The shoes on his feet were broken into pieces, and then his skin was broken into pieces. Blood and clots kept peeling off, like the skin of a wall after being drenched in rain and exposed to the sun. In the blink of an eye, his feet were sliced apart by countless tiny spaces. His flesh and blood were sliced into tiny and regular shapes, falling to the ground of the divine hall several dozen meters below. Only white bones were left on his feet, smeared with blood and flesh. The scene was extremely horrifying. It must have been deliberately delayed. Although the speed of the space cutting was fast, Ning Ke could still clearly see the horrible process. Most importantly, he had enough time to feel the pain. Ning Ke had been injured many times in his life. He had also been punished by the horse gang in the wilderness. But he had never felt such clear and horrible pain. His lips were blue and white. Bean-sized beads of sweat seeped out and fell to the ground of the divine hall, diluting the flesh and blood. A majestic voice kept echoing in his sea of consciousness, like tens of thousands of drums being beaten at the same time, or like tens of thousands of wooden buildings collapsing. This voice had complicated syllables that he couldn't understand, but it also had an unusually clear manifestation of willpower, which was submission. Have a good weekend, everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 903. When Ning Ke woke up, he found himself lying on a cold and hard stone bed. Other than the fence, the walls, the table, and the chairs were also made of stone. He felt that the layout of the room was somewhat familiar. Only when he saw the extremely small stone window did he remember that this should be the U prison in the precipice of Peach Mountain. He had once looked inside through the stone window. Now that Chin Pippi had escaped, he was the prisoner. Through his perception, he was sure that his ocean of qi and mountain of snow had been locked by Sang Sang with some incomprehensible method. He was now weaker than an ordinary person and had no chance of escaping. So he stopped looking at the thin wooden fence and stared at the narrow sky outside the window in silence. He was very tired and his mind was on the verge of collapse. What he needed most was rest, but he could not sleep. Although his body looked fine, the pain of being sliced into pieces in the divine hall of light was still clearly lingering in his body. His arms were placed on the stone bed and he did not dare to move. Even so, he was still trembling in pain. His back that was in contact with the stone bed was even more painful, as if it was being burned. He could not rest because of the pain, so he had to use his time to think. Unfortunately, the result of thinking did not comfort him at all. In the Academy's plan, he should first defeat or control Sang Sang, and then bring her out of the divine halls of West Hill and back to Chang'an. Because only she could truly repair the God-stunning array. Before coming to the Peach Mountain, he knew that the battle with Hao Yan would be very difficult. But he did not expect it to be so difficult and painful that he could not even complete the first step. This did not mean that the Academy's plan was wrong. The Grand Tianqi in the front yard of the Peach Mountain had proved that only Ning Ke had a chance to defeat Hao Yin in the human world. The problem was that no one had any experience in the war between heaven and man. Ning Ke and his senior brothers and sisters had planned for several months in the academy and deduced all kinds of details. However, they did not expect that the level difference between Hao Yin and human beings was so great that they could not even control the natal connection. Fortunately, the academy did not fail. As long as Ning Ke was still alive, there would be a chance to win. The battle between heaven and man had entered a period of strategic stalemate. It depended on who could find a way to break the stalemate first. Ning Ke did not know how long he had been in a coma and what had happened in the outside world during this period. After making sure that no one would come to interrogate him, he closed his eyes and began to recall what had happened that night in the Divine Hall of Light. He did not miss any details of those bloody and cruel scenes. That night he had suffered inhuman torture. Even thinking about it made him feel cold, but he still insisted on remembering, not because he was masochistic but because he wanted to learn. The invisible blades that Sang Sang had landed on his body were the most basic use of space laws. Every time she injured him, it was actually a precious lesson. The divine talismans that Ning Ke had mastered, whether it was the Tu talisman or the E talisman, were all related to space. He did not want to miss the opportunity to learn the rules of space from Hao Yin. His body still felt the lingering pain from the cuts, and his consciousness was still a little hazy. However, he closed his eyes and began to recall and learn. He never let go of any opportunity to learn. He could find the possibility to improve himself through failure and pain. This was what made him truly strong. He closed his eyes and kept recalling the feeling at that time. He recalled the rules of space cutting that he had memorized with his flesh and blood and pain. His fingers trembled slightly on the stone bed. It seemed to be an unconscious tremble, but in fact he was constantly writing the talisman. Ning Ke lay on the stone bed for a long time. The sky outside the stone window darkened. Along the way, someone brought him clean water and simple food. But other than that, nothing else happened. A wet sound came from his stomach and woke him up from his thoughts. He looked at the quiet cell and reconstructed it in his consciousness again. He confirmed that the power of his Tu talisman and E talisman had increased. His eyes brightened slightly and the corners of his lips curled up into a satisfied smile. He thought that suffering was not entirely without its benefits. He sat up with difficulty and stood up with the help of the stone bed. It was just a simple movement, but he felt as if his flesh was about to split again. The pain made his legs wobble. He walked to the stone table and began to eat in silence. He did not know how long the war would last. First, he had to ensure that he could survive and he had to have the strength to live. Even if it was just fantasizing, it still required strength. The rice in the bowl was white with vegetables and tofu on top. There was no oil on it, but he did not find it disgusting. He chewed it slowly as if it was the best meal his teacher had brought him to eat. A bowl full of food entered his stomach. He was no longer hungry and his energy was restored. He even felt that the residual pain in his body had become much lighter. Of course, he had to drink some water after a meal. Ning Ke picked up the bowl of water and raised it to his lips. When he was about to drink, he suddenly thought of something and his face suddenly turned pale. The pain came again and it was even more intense than before. With slightly trembling hands, he slowly put the bowl back on the stone table. He stood up with difficulty and moved to the toilet in the corner of the cell. The toilet was very clean with only a shallow layer of water, like a mirror. He stood in front of the toilet and looked at the haggard face reflected in the water. He was silent for a long time. He did not untie his belt to urinate. He did nothing. He just stood there for a long time. Then he moved back to the stone bed with difficulty and sat down slowly. The moment his buttocks came into contact with the ice-cold stone bed, his face suddenly became a little twisted. The extreme pain that gushed out from between his legs almost made him faint. He gasped in pain. After a long time he finally got used to the pain and became a little calmer. But his chest was still moving up and down because of fear and anger. He did not need to untie his belt to know what had happened to his body. He looked down at his legs and said with some confusion. Somewhat perplexed, he asked, "Can it grow back?" After a short pause, he said in a serious tone, "They have to grow back." Spilled water could not be collected, broken hair could not be continued, broken mirror could not be mended. In the end, it was just difficult, not impossible. It was just that the one who decided this matter was not him, but her in the Light Palace. After a long time of silence, he suddenly felt that it was very funny, so he laughed. But after a while the smile on his face became very sad because it was really not funny. In the divine hall of light she did not have human emotions, nor did she have any pity for him because she was Haoyin, not Sang Sang. Only the pain between his legs made him believe that he still had a chance to win, but this chance was so painful, so unbearable, so miserable. No man was willing to pay such a price. Since he had paid such a heavy price he had to get something in return. Ning Ke looked at the night outside the stone window and recalled the pain at that time. Light gradually appeared in his sense of perception, and the talisman in his imagination had some indescribable sacred beauty. For his cultivation this was a critical time. If he could understand Haoyin's use of the basic rules of space, he could take a big step forward on the road of writing the human talisman. Since Haoyin had cut off his humanity he could only write it himself. At this moment, fog suddenly poured in through the stone window. Ning Ke's pupils shrank. He had once visited the secluded pavilion at night and knew that the fog between the cliffs contained the unreconciled resentment of countless powerhouses in the West Hill Divine Palace. Even in his heyday he could not resist it and had to rely on the moonlight. Not to mention that his snow mountain and ocean of chi were locked and he had become a useless person. The harm caused by the fog was secondary. The key was that he was meditating on talisman Taoism. If he missed this opportunity, no one knew when the next opportunity would appear. Of course, he knew that this must be what she had done after sensing the change in the secluded pavilion. Otherwise the fog could not have entered the cell. You have already done this to me. What else do you want? Ning Ke looked in the direction of the divine hall of light at the peak and shouted angrily, if you dare to touch me again, I will die in front of you. I will drag you down with me. At the same time he pointed his middle finger at the peak. He knew that Sang Sang understood what this middle finger meant. He only had his middle finger left now. But he forgot that Sang Sang's understanding of him was not limited to this. She also knew that he would not die until the last moment. At least, one finger was not enough for him to commit suicide. So the wind blew in the cell and the fog dispersed. Ning Ke's middle finger was cut off. Then countless thin red lines appeared on his body. The cruel and bloody scene of being dismembered was played again. Ning Ke could only smile bitterly to express his helplessness. The indescribable pain continued to torment him. Deep into the night, his consciousness gradually dissipated. Even the last bit of clarity was covered in mist and became blurry. Haoyin's will was so strong that it could not be rejected. He was falling into the abyss of surrender. He did not know if it was because of his instinct to avoid it or because of the pain. He had a dream. In the dream he was sleeping with Sang Sang in his arms. He touched her white lotus-like feet and her soft and smooth body. The wetness on his fingertips became thicker and thicker. In the cell he tossed and turned on the stone bed. He was in so much pain that he could not fall asleep, but he could not wake up from this dream. His fingers hanging on the edge of the bed were full of blood. On the peak of Peach Mountain, thousands of feet above the secluded pavilion, Sang Sang also had a dream in the divine hall of light. It was a beautiful but annoying dream. She was very angry in the dream. In the divine hall, she tossed and turned on the ground with her eyes closed. Her eyelashes trembled slightly, her thighs tightened, and her breath became heavy. The flowery green dress on her seemed to be torn apart at any time. Ning Ke was still in pain in the dream. He felt that he could not hold on any longer. He crawled up from under her and saw her face. It was not that indifferent face but that youthful face. It was a little dark and it was very familiar. She opened her bright willow-shaped eyes and looked at him curiously. He suddenly became very calm and forgot the pain on his body. He slowly lowered his head and kissed her lips. Kiss it and live. The title of this chapter was also going to be, Kiss It and Live. It would be good if the lyrics were changed. It's time to break the stalemate. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 904. This was a very strange dream. Ning Ke was immersed in the pleasure brought by a man and a woman, but at the same time, he felt the terrible pain of having his flesh cut and bones cut. The two completely different and opposite feelings made his mind feel like it was about to be torn into two halves, and he almost chose to surrender in front of the divine power. Fortunately, he saw Sang Sang's face at this critical moment. The old face and the youthful face brought him true peace. He kissed her and came back to life. He came back to life from the erotic and terrible nightmare. He found himself still lying on the cold stone bed, covered in sweat. He knew that this dream was the result of the confrontation between his consciousness and Sang Sang's. He could not help but feel a lingering fear when he thought of how he was almost subdued. He clenched his fists and stretched the muscles on his arms. Suddenly he felt a strong pain and discomfort. He confirmed that what happened in the dream was real. He was cut into pieces again. Suddenly, footsteps were heard outside the quiet cell. Ning Ke looked out of the bars and found that it was not the deacon from the judicial department who pretended to be deaf and mute, but someone he knew. The man was young, gentle, and handsome. He wore an ordinary Taoist robe and had a yellow oiled paper umbrella under his armpit. He was He Mingqi, the disciple of Li Qingshan, the former nation master of Tang. After Li Qingshan's death, He Mingqi took over the imperial center of the Tang Empire. But no one knew that he was the most important person the West Hill Divine Palace had hidden in Chang'an. He directly accepted the orders of the Abbey Dean and the hierarch and did what Haotian Taoism had failed to do for 1,000 years. He used the shadow left by Haotian in Chang'an to destroy the God-stunning array. He was also the one who caused the chaos that night in Chang'an. He Mingqi was the one who caused the greatest harm to the Tang Empire in this world war against the Tang Empire. He was undoubtedly at the top of the list of people the Tang Empire must kill for revenge. Because of this, the hierarch sent him to the south after the war and did not let him return to Peach Mountain until the right to light. Ning Ke looked at him outside the bars. His eyes were calm without a trace of anger. But this absolute calmness showed his true attitude, because he could only be so calm when he was looking at a dead man. According to the Southern Gate Temple's Taoist system, He Mingqi should be his senior brother. But in his eyes, He Mingqi was already a dead man. In the eyes of all the Tangs, He Mingqi could only be a dead man. He Mingqi pushed open the bars and walked into the cell. He placed the food and water on the stone table and then gently lifted the front of his Taoist robe. He sat on the stone chair and looked at Ning Ke on the stone bed. Different from Ning Ke's calm and emotionless eyes, the emotions in his eyes were very complicated, with some envy, some jealousy, some fear, some sympathy, and some admiration. In Chang'an, He Mingqi always held a yellow oiled paper umbrella under his arm and walked between the Imperial Palace and the Southern Gate Temple with his body slightly bent. Compared to Ning Ke, he was so low-key that he did not attract any attention. Now Ning Ke naturally knew that this was just a facade he deliberately put on. His status in Haotian Taoism was probably far beyond people's imagination. Otherwise, the Abbey Dean and the hierarch would not have given him such an important task, and he would not have been qualified to enter the U prison to see him. If Long Qing was said to be the brilliant and beautiful son of God under the sunlight of the West Hill Divine Palace, then He Mingqi would be the opposite, hidden in the shadows of the West Hill Divine Palace. This person was very shrewd and his cultivation state might have long surpassed the upper state of see-through. Even after the chaos in Chang'an, no one in the Tang Empire knew if this person had reached the knowing destiny state. Of course, now that Ning Ke had become a useless person, He Mingqi's true state had nothing to do with him. Ning Ke only felt a little regretful. That day in the front yard of the Peach Mountain, when he received Tianqi and was invincible, he had looked for He Mingqi. However, he did not know if this person had an unimaginable ability to predict danger, or if he was extremely lucky, but he had actually left the hierarch's sacred sedan and hid somewhere. He Mingqi did not speak and Ning Ke naturally would not speak either. He had no interest in talking to this person. Thus, the silence in the cell continued until a very soft sound was heard. A drop of water fell from the front of the yellow oiled paper umbrella to the ground. Ning Ke looked at the stone window and found that he could only see the gray sky. There was no rain. He Mingqi said, "It's raining outside. It's a pity that you can't see it from here." Ning Ke said, "It's not a bad thing to not be drenched by the rain." He Mingqi said, "It's not a good thing to never be drenched by the rain. You can't be here to ask me about something. Even the Abbey Dean and Xiong Chumo are not qualified to ask about it, let alone you. So what can you do here? Get some kind of pleasure from seeing me being imprisoned? Not being able to see the rain is part of it? But why do I feel that you are jealous of me?" Ning Ke said while looking at the stone window. There was no emotion in his voice. He Mingqi was silent for a moment and said, "I am indeed jealous of you." Ning Ke looked at him and said, "There are thousands of reasons for people to be jealous of someone like me. It can't be helped if one is too outstanding. You don't have to feel inferior because of it." He Mingqi laughed at himself and said, "Being imprisoned and unable to leave the Peach Mountain alive, yet you are still so confident and proud. In this aspect I am indeed not as good as you." Ning Ke said, "You are not as good as me in all aspects. There is no doubt about that." He Mingqi said, "That's your opinion. It doesn't represent mine. Yes, I am indeed jealous of you. Because I don't understand why Hao Yin let you live. Ning Ke saw the confusion and piety in the depths of his peaceful eyes and understood the subtle reasons. He said, your level is too far away from these things. He Mingqi said, in Chang'an I followed Hao Yin's shadow. Under her will, I destroyed the god-stunning array. I am the mortal closest to her in this world. Ning Ke said, no one is closer to her than me. He Mingqi said, yes. That's why I am jealous of you. Ning Ke said, jealousy can easily drive people crazy. Or you can try to kill me. He Mingqi said after a moment of silence, no one can go against Hao Yin's will. Ning Ke said, my master did it, youngest uncle did it, and I did it many times. He Mingqi said, so the headmaster and Mr. Ku are both dead. Ning Ke said, but I am still alive. He Mingqi said, yes. Ning Ke said, as long as I am alive, I can prove that Hao Yin is not omnipotent. He Mingqi said, yes. Ning Ke said, so you really want to kill me? He brought the conversation back to the key point. He knew very well that he was a blasphemous existence in the heart of a devout Taoist follower like He Mingqi. He Mingqi stood up in silence and put the yellow oiled paper umbrella back under his armpit. Ning Ke reminded him, the umbrella is wet. It's indecent for your armpit to be wet, and people will easily suspect that you have a body odor. Similarly, if you want to kill me, don't have killing intent towards me. Otherwise it will be difficult to succeed. He Mingqi held the yellow oiled paper umbrella in his hand and looked at the water stains on the ground. He asked confusedly, why do I feel that you really want to be killed by me? Ning Ke was silent for a moment and said, this is still something you can't understand. If he died, Sang Sang would die and the academy and the Tang Empire would win the war. The headmaster would have a much higher chance of winning in heaven, and there would be hope in the human world. He was on the verge of collapse after being tortured by 1,000 cuts. He had many reasons to die. But he didn't want to kill himself. He didn't want Sang Sang to die because he was afraid and unwilling. So he hoped to be killed so that he could die with Sang Sang. At least that was out of his control. He Mingqi didn't understand what he meant, but he felt strongly humiliated. He mocked, now you have no chance to kill me. Don't you feel a little regretful? Ning Ke said, I felt regretful before but not now. Because I suddenly realized that even though I'm a useless person now, there are still countless ways to kill you. To put it more accurately, if I want to leave Peach Mountain or the human world, I will kill you first. That means you won't live for long. He Mingqi still didn't understand what he was saying, but for some reason he felt a chill in his heart. He asked, how could you kill me? Ning Ke looked at him and said, if Hao Yin wants you to die, how long can you live? He Mingqi repeated the conversation in the U prison without missing a word. Even though you made a great contribution to Taoism in Chang'an, if something like today happens again, I will have to grind your bones into ashes. The hierarch looked at He Mingqi who was kneeling down the stone steps and said. He looked very tall in the gauze. Even though everyone knew that he was just a short and skinny Taoist after the right to light, he still shone brightly in the divine hall and no one dared to question him. He was reprimanding He Mingqi, but his voice was so humble because he knew that if the one in the divine hall of light was willing to listen, he would be able to hear his voice. He Mingqi said, I don't understand why Hao Yin didn't kill Ning Quebec. He knew that Hao Yin was on the Peach Mountain, and he knew that Hao Yin knew everything. But he still raised his doubts. It didn't mean that he had lost his respect for Hao Yin, but he thought that he was thinking for Taoism and that his piety would be understood by Hao Yin. Many people in the West Hill Divine Palace, including him, could not understand why Ning Ke had not been executed. After all, once he died, the god-stunning array would lose its master. If the two seniors were to kill the masters in the academy, Chang'an would fall, and the Tang Empire and the academy would be destroyed. The hierarch frowned slightly and scolded, how can we ordinary mortals understand Hao Yin's will? You have no right to think about these things. He Mingqi lowered his head and kept silent for a long time. He suddenly felt that Hao Yin might need his help, just like how Ning Ke wanted to be killed. But this thought was too disrespectful. He was terrified and sweated profusely. To dispel this fear, he thought of something important and reported, I heard that the great divine priest of judgment is in a bad mood these days and occasionally looks at the divine hall of light from afar. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 905. Behind the curtain, the hierarch remained silent. His broken hand had been healed by Hao Yin, but Ning Kei's shoulder, which was injured by the primordial 13 arrows, was not healed. Just as he told He Mingqi, there were many things that were hard to understand in the divine halls of West Hill, including the recent silence of the divine hall of judgment. At the right to light, Yi Hongyu, the great divine priest of judgment, had been questioned by many, especially the descendants of the great divine priest of light who had returned from the South Sea. But she was of high status. Even though he was the hierarch of the divine hall, he could not punish her without any evidence. But He Mingqi's words made him even more vigilant. Because of some things that happened many years ago, and also because He Mingqi said that she occasionally looked at the divine hall of light from afar. The divine hall of light was on Peach Mountain and could be seen at any time. Yi Hongyu was the great divine priest of judgment. In the past, she could even walk to the front of the divine hall of light and observe it carefully, let alone look at it from afar. But the divine hall of light was not what it used to be. Since the peach blossoms all over the mountain were revived in spring and the eternal lamp was extinguished, the divine hall of light had become a forbidden place on Peach Mountain. It seemed to be isolated from the world and no one dared to peep at it. Since Hao Yin had performed miracles several times during the right to light, the believer's guess had become the truth. Naturally, no one dared to disrespect the divine hall of light. No one dared to talk about who lived in the divine hall of light, let alone peep at it. Even guessing became a taboo. The divine priests of the South Sea were temporarily arranged to live in the divine hall of revelation. Zhao Nanhai and the others had returned to Peach Mountain to fight for power with the hierarch. But now they dared not do anything. They prayed to the divine hall of light every day, hoping that they could see the face of God. Under such circumstances, Yi Hongyu looked at the divine hall of light from afar, which was puzzling and alarming. What was she looking at? Did she dare to peep at the person in the divine hall of light? In the depths of the divine hall of judgment, Yi Hongyu sat silently on the black jade throne. Her beautiful face was devoid of any emotion. She was so cold and indifferent. She had spent most of her time on the throne and did not respond to her subordinates' reports. It was as if she had lost the ability to think. The reason for this was that she had been thinking about a certain scene. During the right to light, Ning Kei had destroyed the hierarch's sacred chariot with one arrow. The short and skinny old Taoist had looked so ridiculous. Because of that image, she had been tossing and turning these days, unable to sleep peacefully. Her mind was full of thoughts and she could not calm down. Just as He Mingqi said, her mood was naturally not good. As for the fact that she would occasionally look towards the divine hall of light, it was because the news of Ning Kei being locked up in the U prison could not be hidden from her, the great divine priest of judgment. She really wanted to know how that person in the divine hall would deal with Ning Kei, and this would affect her thoughts on a certain matter. Just like Peach Mountain, the atmosphere in the entire West Hill Divine Kingdom was tense. Because of the academy, the right to light did not go smoothly. The sacrifices escaped, and the West Hill Divine Palace suffered heavy casualties. Because of Liu Bai's death, the Sword Garret officially broke off relations with Taoism. In the end, it ended hastily or even miserably. Many of the prepared ceremonies were not held. But many people did not leave the West Hill Divine Kingdom. The emperors from various countries kowtowed devoutly at the front yard of Peach Mountain and then left reluctantly. But the diplomatic corps stayed, as well as the dancers and musicians who were supposed to participate in the ceremony, and tens of thousands of believers. Hao Yin was in the human world and he might be in the West Hill Divine Palace. Under such circumstances, how could those devout believers leave the West Hill Divine Kingdom? They could not be moved even if they were stabbed with knives and axes. Therefore, the front yard of Peach Mountain and the surrounding villages were still filled with people, but no one dared to make a ruckus. The Tang Empire did not send any diplomatic corps to the right to light. The ones who came to the West Hill Divine Kingdom were the House of Red Sleeves, which had no official status. In fact, if the West Hill Divine Palace had not insisted on including this clause in the treaty, the Tang Imperial Court would not have even sent the House of Red Sleeves. Because everyone knew that the Tangs would not be treated well here. The House of Red Sleeves was scheduled to perform after the right to light. But Chen Pippi was rescued by the Academy, so the celebration could not continue. After that, they prepared to leave Peach Mountain, but were forced to stay by the West Hill Divine Palace. This was a war between the Tang Empire and the West Hill. The Academy had disrupted the right to light, but they were forced to stay. This was a depressing and dangerous matter. The girls of the House of Red Sleeves lived in a small town in front of the mountain. Their house was ordinary, and there were many cavalrymen of the divine halls guarding outside. The girls were naturally afraid that misfortune would befall them at any time. The leader of the House of Red Sleeves was Xiao Qiao. She used to be a childish and adorable girl, but now she had matured. Although she was still young, she already had the demeanor of a great general. When the Divine Hall revealed their intention of not allowing them to return to Chang'an, she immediately sent the news back to Chang'an through relevant channels. Just the day before yesterday, the negotiation document from the imperial court of the Tang Empire had arrived. That was why the West Hill Divine Palace did not do anything to the House of Red Sleeves. But Xiao Qiao knew that the letter from the imperial court could only temporarily alleviate the current situation. It could not really bring the girls of the House of Red Sleeves back to Chang'an. If they continued to stay in such a hostile and dangerous environment, she was worried that the girls, who were on the verge of a nervous breakdown, could only hold on for a few more days. Your Excellency, I want a definite answer. Xiao Qiao looked at the West Hill Divine Priest in front of her and said calmly and firmly, if the Divine Halls do not allow us to leave the West Hill, I need a reason, and so does the Tang Imperial Court. The West Hill Divine Priest squinted at her and said, are you threatening the Divine Halls? Xiao Qiao slightly lowered her head and said, I dare not. But the Divine Halls also have to be reasonable. The West Hill Divine Priest sneered and thought that the Divine Halls had lost face because of the Tangs who made the right to light end up like this. How dare you ask the Divine Halls to be reasonable? I said a few days ago that since you are here to dance, how can you leave? Xiao Qiao said, if you want to see the dance we can do it anytime. What? The Divine Priest frowned and said unhappily, it is a great honor for the Divine Halls to ask you to dance. Just wait patiently for the order. Why do you have so many questions? Be careful that you will be punished for being disrespectful. Xiao Cao's chest rose and fell slightly. She suppressed her anger and said, even the dance needs time to prepare. Please tell us the date, Your Excellency. The Divine Priest said indifferently, I don't know. Xiao Qiao asked, then who knows? The Divine Priest looked at her and said mockingly, I don't know either. Xiao Qiao said calmly, I want to see the Hierarch Lord. I think he must know. Who are you to want to see the Hierarch Lord? The Divine Priest scolded. Xiao Qiao remained calm and said, then I want to see the great Divine Priest of Judgment. The Divine Priest looked at Xiao Qiao and said mockingly, even now, you stubborn Tang still refuse to accept the reality? Let me tell you, unless you die you will never cross this threshold again. The Tang Imperial Court's document failed to persuade the West Hill Divine Halls to let the House of Red Sleeves go back to Chang'an. From that moment on, Xiao Qiao knew that the ending that awaited her and the girls would be extremely miserable. Even if the Imperial Court was willing to start another war with the West Hill Divine Halls for these ordinary girls, they would not be able to change the fact that they would die. The girls of the House of Red Sleeves also understood this, but no one had ever mentioned it. They always held on to the slightest hope. Until the Divine Priest pointed it out, Xiao Cao's expression became gloomy. Faint sobbing sounds came from the house behind the courtyard. The West Hill Divine Priest was very satisfied with the sobbing sounds. When he was about to say something to make the Tang girls more miserable, the courtyard door was suddenly pushed open. He turned to the West Hill Divine Guards and asked, what's the matter? One of the West Hill Divine Guards said, a lord wants to see the girls of the House of Red Sleeves. The Divine Priest frowned unhappily and said coldly, which hall is the lord from? I am ordered by the Hierarch Lord to look after these Tang girls personally. No one is allowed to see them. The West Hill Divine Guard scolded, who are you? How dare you inquire about such things? Hearing this, Xiao Qiao could not help but feel relieved. But she was even more curious and vigilant. Who dared to ignore the Hierarch's order? Could it be the great Divine Priest of Judgment who was acquainted with Ning Ke? The Divine Priest trembled with anger. He looked at the crowd and scolded, how dare you look down on the Hierarch Lord? Do you want to die? Who dares to stop the people the Divine Hall of Light wants to see? A very young voice sounded. The West Hill Divine Guards separated and revealed a girl in white. The Divine Priest looked at the girl in white and suddenly remembered something. He suddenly felt that all the strength in his body had been sucked out. He collapsed on the ground and could no longer get up. The girl in white did not even look at the Divine Priest. She walked to the courtyard and looked at the girls who came out of the houses. She frowned slightly and asked, who is Xiao Qiao? Xiao Qiao took a deep breath and took a step forward. She said respectfully, yes, I am. Before the right to light, the people of the House of Red Sleeves were placed under house arrest in this shabby house. She did not know what had happened these days. She did not know what the Divine Hall of Light meant to Haoyan Taoism. She did not know the background of the girl in white. But based on the reaction of the divine priest, she knew that the girl in white must have an important position in the West Hill Divine Palace. So no matter what happened next, she had to seize the opportunity. The girl in white looked at Xiao Qiao and did not understand why her master specially summoned this Tang girl. Until now, no one could enter the Divine Hall of Light, not even the hierarch. Xiao Qiao followed the girl into the horse carriage and left the town. The girls of the House of Red Sleeves rushed to the gate and watched the horse carriage gradually disappear. They were full of worry and did not know what Xiao Qiao would encounter in the Divine Hall of Light. It was not until then that the divine priest of West Hill woke up from his extreme fear. He left the courtyard in a daze and committed suicide that night. 3 small things determine the world. Everything has been good recently, but I can't stand the heat in Hubei. After living in the Northeast for a few years, I really can't get used to it. The book review competition will be awarded on the 1st of June. I will return to the Northeast before that day. The coolness is waiting for me. I will work very hard in June. I guarantee 200,000 yuan, but I still won't ask for any tickets. This is to make up for this month. Thank you again. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 906. After spring, no one had entered the Divine Hall of Light, including the Hierarch Lord. Therefore, when the respectful divine priests and deacons saw Xiao Qiao being brought into the Divine Hall by the girl in white, they could not help showing a shocked expression. They could not understand what they were seeing. Xiao Qiao herself did not understand what had happened to her. She knew that the Divine Hall of Light had not had a master for many years. So who wanted to see her? After the girl in white led her into the Divine Hall, she quietly left. Looking at the empty and magnificent Divine Hall, she felt so small and subconsciously knelt on the soft cushion. There was a curtain in the depths of the Divine Hall. Behind the curtain there was no shadow or sound. It was so quiet that it was frightening. She lowered her head and anxiously waited for her ending. Time passed slowly. She did not know how long she had been kneeling and waiting. Her knees were already sore, but she did not dare to stand up. She became more and more nervous. Suddenly she saw a big black horse. Xiao Cao's eyes revealed a happy expression because she recognized the big black horse and knew it was Ning Kei's mount. She was about to greet the black horse when she thought of another thing. She used to have a good friend in Chang'an. That friend was about the same age as her. She was dark and thin. They used to give each other many small gifts. She taught her friend how to put on makeup and how to seduce the lecherous master of her house. Later, her good friend encountered many things and became a young lady of the Grand Secretary's family. It was said that she even became the successor of the great divine priest of light. But when they met occasionally, she was still the same person. Xiao Qiao was extremely shocked and confused. She covered her chest and sat on the soft cushion. She could not believe her own inference. However, she knew that there could be no other explanation. The wind gradually rose in the Divine Hall of Light and lifted a corner of the curtain. But she did not see any old friend. She only vaguely saw a very tall girl standing on the balcony. Was it Sang Sang? Xiao Qiao stood up and looked at the figure. She wanted to call her but did not dare to. No matter whether she was the master of the Divine Hall of Light or some other bigwig in the West Hill Divine Palace, she was no longer the inconspicuous friend of the past. I grant you immortality. An extremely majestic voice reverberated in the Light Palace. Xiao Qiao didn't know if the voice came from the figure on the balcony or not. She stared blankly at the curtain that divided the world into 2 halves and slightly clenched her fists, which were hanging by the side of her skirt. The girl in white who had disappeared earlier reappeared and brought her out of the Light Palace. After entering the Divine Hall of Light, Xiao Qiao didn't do anything. She didn't encounter any torture, didn't see any old friends, and didn't kowtow to Hao Tian. She just left. Everything seemed to be for her to hear those words, I grant you eternal life. Xiao Qiao left the Divine Hall of Light and returned to the small town. The girls of the House of Red Sleeves anxiously inquired about what had happened. Before she could say anything, the Divine Hall had sent dozens of cavalrymen to escort the House of Red Sleeves out of the West Hill Divine Kingdom and even to the south of the Verdant Canyon. After returning to Chang'an, Xiao Qiao still felt that this trip to the West Hill was like a dream, especially the time when she waited in the Divine Hall of Light. It was really like a dream without any elements of reality. It was not until many years later that she realized what the divine gift meant. On the Peach Mountain, the Haotian divine hall where the hierarch resided had always been the highest. But now, in the eyes of the people, the quiet divine hall of light was truly unattainable. No one dared to go against the will of the divine hall of light, not even the hierarch. However, since the beginning of spring, the divine hall of light had been silent until recently, when it issued several orders. The first order of the divine hall of light was to escort the House of Red Sleeves back to Chang'an. This order puzzled the people in the divine hall, but in the eyes of the hierarch and other insiders, the reason was simple. When Haotian was recuperating in the mortal world, he had received some favors from mortals. This was just to return the favor. However, the second order of the divine hall of light shocked the hierarch. The girl in white expressionlessly asked the divine hall to immediately stop the pursuit of Qin Pipi and Tang Xiaotang. During the right to light, Tang Xiaotang broke into the Peach Mountain and escaped with Qin Pipi, which was a great humiliation to the divine hall of West Hill. Naturally, they had to pay a heavy price. After that, the powerhouses of the divine hall went out to search everywhere. They even set up many traps on the road from Qinghe Prefecture to Chang'an. The hierarch firmly believed that under the pressure of the drunkard and the butcher, the real powerhouses of the back of the mountain of the academy dared not do anything. Then Qin Pipi and Tang Xiaotang would be caught by the divine hall sooner or later, and then they would be executed. At this time, the girl in white asked the divine hall to immediately stop the search. Why did Haotian do that? The hierarch was a little confused, but he dared not to question it. For the divine hall of West Hill, the House of Red Sleeves left unscathed. Although it was infuriating, it was still a trivial matter. Stopping the pursuit of Qin Pipi and Tang Xiaotang was the real important matter. For Sang Sang these were all trivial matters. Because for Haotian, everything in the human world was trivial. Her decision had nothing to do with human emotions, but was based on heaven's plan. The purpose of the right to light was to reopen the gate of Haotian's divine kingdom, and at the same time cut off her mortal bond. That was why she asked Qin Pipi to be the sacrifice and asked the Tang Empire to send the House of Red Sleeves to the divine kingdom of West Hill. In her original plan, after the raging sacred fire, Qin Pipi and Tang Xiaotang would die, and Xiao Qiao would also die. Then, most of her mortal ties with the human world would be severed. Unfortunately, Ning Ke appeared. He proved to her through the Grand Tianqi that mortal bond could not be cut off. Therefore, after thinking about it, she decided to change the solution. If mortal bond was love, then she would repay it with her life. She gave Xiao Qiao immortality and gave Qin Pipi and Tang Xiaotang another life. She thought that she could cut off the bond between herself and the human world. Ning Ke did not know about these things. Just as Mingqi said that day, he could only see the falling leaves and rain clouds outside the stone window, but he could not stand the rain. He was now the most important prisoner of the U prison, but he did not care. If he had not come to Peach Mountain, he would still be a prisoner in Chang'an. He would be imprisoned anyway, so it did not matter where he was imprisoned. What he cared about was the battle between him and Sang Sang. He lay on the stone bed and continued to dream. Erotic dreams, terrifying dreams. He fought with a woman who was sometimes plump and sometimes skinny, enjoying the extreme pain and pleasure of life. He often kissed her and occasionally bit her, feeling her soft and smooth skin, feeling the pain of being cut into pieces. She was in the divine hall of light on the peak, and he was in the cold stone room on the precipice. They loved and hated each other, separated by thousands of feet. He let her feel the most wonderful feeling in the human world, and she let him feel the most painful feeling in the human world. She kept killing him and he kept loving her. It was all torture. This was a battle between heaven and man, and also a battle between a man and a woman. These two battles had happened countless times in history, but now they had merged into one. This battle was very ordinary, just like the simplest family drama. It was just a matter of who was at the top and who was at the bottom, who wanted to change positions and who didn't. In the end, there would always be one side who would emerge victorious, and then their voices would be louder in the family. But this battle was not ordinary because it was not about who was the master of the old brush pen shop, but the outcome of the battle between Haotian and mankind, and the final direction of the world. Sometimes when Ning Ke thought about the fate of the world decided by the life of a married couple, he would inevitably feel that it was ridiculous, but he also could not hide his pride and complacency. The battle in the dream continued. He did not know how long it had been in the cell. The autumn leaves outside the stone window became fewer and fewer, until it started to snow. He did not know that it was winter. No one surrendered and there was no victory or defeat. Ning Ke looked at the falling snowflakes outside the stone window, and thought of how the frequency of torture had gradually decreased these days. He frowned slightly, trying to guess what had happened. He did not know what was happening outside, but he was sure that old Master Chui had been killed by him. He knew that there were people in the small town where the drunkard and the butcher were, but he did not know that they were his old friends. He knew that the Tang Empire and the Academy had made preparations, and Qinghe County would soon face the wrath of revenge. But all of this was on the premise that he could defeat Sang Sang. If heaven had feelings, heaven would age easily. If Sang Sang had feelings, he could win. But now he could not see any possibility, nor could he find a way to break the stalemate. What confused or alarmed him the most was that Sang Sang should not be able to find any way to break away from the mortal world. But why did she seem so calm and confident in the dream? Another small incident happened in the Divine Hall of Light. Two girls in white were kneeling behind Sang Sang, looking extremely nervous and sad, especially the one on the left, who was gradually opening her eyes, crying in fear. On a wooden plate not far away, there was a pair of white underwear stained with blood. It turned out that the girl in white had her first menstruation. They were selected by the Divine Hall from over 100,000 girls in the West Hill Divine Kingdom. They were required to be fair and clean, free from the filth of the world. They knew this very well. Their experience in the Divine Hall of Light over the past 6 months made them realize how great the saintess they served was. They were proud and more devout because of this. However, their first menstruation finally came. They knew what was waiting for them, but they did not dare to hide it. So they knelt behind Sang Sang, crying and waiting for Hao Yin's punishment. Sang Sang did not punish them. She looked at the looming bright moon in the night sky and said, "The human world has begun to call this menstruation. I don't know if you will find it interesting or annoying." Light snow was drifting on the terrace. She frowned slightly and looked at a precipice in the wind and snow. Her right hand slowly fell on her lower abdomen. A dam of 1,000 miles was made of baskets of soil. A city of 1,000 years was made of black bricks. No matter how big the event was, it was actually made up of extremely small things. 3 small things happened in her world. These 3 small things led to one result. She decided to release someone. I wish you all a happy weekend. There will be updates on Saturday tomorrow. There will be no Saturdays in the future. Please be informed. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.